Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Jeff Gerstmann Show. It's Thursday, the 29th here. I mentioned this on Twitter and, of course, on the Patreon page and on Discord. We got COVID last week. This is a fun treat. Yeah, after the past however many years it's been, yes, we finally, and you know, we kind of knew, I was like, this is going to happen pretty fast, I think, judging by how things are going, but it felt like we were kind of, you know, between a rock and a hard place. Our daughter really needed to get out and be amongst other kids and go to school and preschool and stuff like that. She's 3, not ready for school. But, you know, we have to keep kind of getting her out there a little bit more and all this stuff. And so we sent her off to a preschool. She made it a week and a half. Made it 3 days. She made it 3 times. She's going 2 days a week. And that is our best guess for because she started showing symptoms first. And it seemed very mild, very like, she's got a cold because she hasn't been around other kids in forever. And, you know, as soon as she gets around them, of course, she's going to get some kind of cold. And after about a day, you know, we started showing some symptoms too. And I was like, you know what? I got a bad feeling about this. And then the next day, my wife took a test. And yeah, we all got COVID, all 4 of us. So the kids, you know, mostly kind of bounced through it. My daughter got better at taking medicine over the course of this, which is a fun benefit. Hopefully that will something that'll be with her for years to come, as it became less of a fight there, as of like yesterday. We learned that my son can take medicine like no problem. He's just like, yeah, no, because if you're not familiar with giving medicine to an infant, you don't really, I mean, you can, but you know, you don't really deliver it on a spoon. You like all the stuff like infants Tylenol to deal with fevers and stuff like that comes with a little syringe, you know, a little plastic kind of, you know, plunger sort of thing. So you're just like jabbing that in their mouth and just squirting it all in and then holding their mouth shut like they were a dog or a cat or another animal until they swallow it. And yeah, my son's just like, whatever. He just wasn't even fazed by the whole thing, which was surprising. My daughter has never been good with it. We had a whole separate little chair we could strap her into that we called the medicine chair. We got rid of it because she outgrew it. But, you know, when she was a baby, when she was my son's age, 1, 2, 1.5, we would, you know, have to kind of put her in there and be like, okay, this is a chair. We can prop her in just right. Do this. Hold. Okay, I squirt. You hold. Let's go. You know, now she'll take it standing up and all that sort of stuff. And anyway, the kids did fine mostly through it, other than having to get some medicine. And my daughter still has a runny nose and all that sort of stuff. You know, their sleep was not too interrupted. My wife and I did significantly worse. It's a crazy, this COVID, you heard of this? It is unlike anything I've ever been sick with before. You know, people have likened it to the flu and like, yes, but it's like your body is trying to speed run the flu by having as many symptoms as possible, and they just rotate through hour to hour. So it's actually maybe a better way of putting it. It's the symptoms kind of modulate. So like 1 hour you'll be like, I've got the chills and I feel like I am going to just like die. And then an hour later you're like, oh, this is like a head cold. I just have a head cold. This is okay. And then, you know, an hour after that you'll be like, why am I sweating so much? Why is there sweat dripping off of my face? You know? And It feels like someone's trying to pick a lock. It feels like this very alien thing of like something is trying to get to you, and it's trying all these different tactics hour by hour, and it's feels crazy. But yeah, after a few days of that, I think we're feeling better than we did 3 days ago, or over the weekend for sure, which was just awful. But now for me, mostly it feels like a head cold, but also there's like just this overwhelming fatigue, or like there's just it's not a lack of energy per se. It's the minute I try to do something, it's not there the way you expect it to be. And sometimes after you get a flu, you'll be like that, but it feels very odd. There's stuff like I went to squat down to pick something up and like came to stand back up, and it's like the strength in my legs is not there the way it should be. What the hell's going on with that? Some of my advice is don't get it if you can help it. Obviously a lot of people have already had it, and so this is going to sound like old news to you or whatever, but yeah, it sucks. And, of course, like perfect timing. Like I went to go get the most recent booster shot, like the day my wife started getting symptoms, and I started feeling sick the day after. So like later that night, I was like had like huge, body aches and all that sort of stuff that, cause I got the flu shot at the same time. They doubled me up. And so I think the body aches is probably from the flu shot, because I never had that happen from the booster shots in the past. But yeah, so that was like, I was worried for a minute, like, oh, am I gonna, does that negate the power of the booster? What happens there? Well, I guess the recommendation is like, hey, don't do this. Like, don't get a booster shot if you have COVID. But if you do, it's not, at the main worry is that the symptoms and the you may feel worse. And I felt pretty bad, but my wife felt significantly worse than I did. So I don't know. I feel like I got through it relatively light, I guess. I don't know. But it's a very bad and very surreal feeling, because sometimes you feel like almost all the way okay, and you're like, oh, this is not so bad. And then again, like 2 hours later, you're like, am I gonna make it through this? What the hell's going on? It was real up and down. And yesterday I lost my taste and smell, my ability to do either, to any great degrees. Today, my sense of it's weird. So that's another thing that feels like my sense of smell is back and my sense of taste is back, but not the way it should be. And of course, like the minute you start asking other people about stuff, like everyone's experience is like vastly different, and that's maybe one of the weirdest things about it is you got people that are just like, yeah, I'm on day 12 and I'm on day, I've felt like garbage for a month and a half. And some people are like, yeah, it was a rough 3 days and then I was fine, and so the variance in how hard it can hit and how long it can last, and the uncertainty associated with that is really troubling, because I originally I was going to, what is today? Today is Thursday, right? Let me look. Yeah, so today is Thursday. I've been trying to record this podcast every day since Tuesday. Like initially, like on Monday when I went to bed, I was like, I feel okay. I bet I'll wake up Tuesday and just do a show. Like maybe it'll be a short show, but I'll figure something out. And then I woke up Tuesday feeling like trash. And I was like, I can't even speak into a microphone. Like, no way. I couldn't even look at screens. Like, I have not had a, I've not been able to play a lot of games this week or anything, because just like looking and focusing at a screen sometimes felt really difficult. And so I've been kind of taking it easy on that, but I've been getting some things in here and there, little by little. Played some video pinball for the Atari 2600 in bed last night on the Steam Deck, quality stuff. You got to inch back into video games. And by that, I mean, you have to start back at, the Odyssey 2 and work your way forward. So I'm up to the the 3DO M2. We're checking out some of the the leaked prototypes for that, and then no. Anyway, so we're getting there. Everyone in this house is still a little off, but it feels like we are trudging our way through it. And I feel much more capable and stuff than I did even a day ago, but still not right. Still not right at all. Anyway, why don't we talk about some video games? We're going to take a quick break and check out this, and then on the other end of this, we will come back and we will talk about the video games I played probably before I got sick or as I was getting sick. How about that? Dress shirts. Let's talk about them. They're the worst. They're pointless. Most of them don't even look good, but the ones that look all right are usually stiff as heck. You can't do anything in them. They're like sheer in weird spots and too thick in others. Even the ones that you get that fit right are still just made of like the worst feeling materials. It's just uncomfortable. It's a hassle. Like if you want to go do something else, like you're like, okay, well, let me change into a shirt I can move in. Ugh. Well, look, we can all agree that the dress shirt was due for a radical reinvention. And Roan has stepped up to the challenge. Roan's commuter shirt is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible shirt known to man. That's a bold claim, but here's why. Roan's got comfortable 4-way stretch fabric, so that provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way from whatever, you're commuting in or whatever, you're going to go play some golf or, what we can do, you're like, hey, we're at this wedding and I'm in this dress shirt and it's too stiff for me to do anything else, but I'm in this dress shirt because I'm at this wedding, and then you end up go like screwing around later and you're still, something you can do something in, something you can live in and still look good. You can feel confident in Roan's shirts because it's a wrinkle-free shirt without the hassle. Roan's wrinkle release technology makes wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the shirt. It's that easy. That's it. And it's got odor-free technology in it. That's right, Gold Fusion anti-odor tech means you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. On top of that, Roan is 100% machine washable. That's right. That is maybe the biggest. Maybe we should have mentioned that up front. No dry cleaner. You don't have to take this or hey, you don't have to let this shirt sit somewhere for a year and a half where you think like, I got to take this in and get dry clean. I should just get rid of this shirt. No, machine washable shirts. That's the power of Roan. And it's versatile. You can feel all right in it. You can put on this shirt and feel like, hey, this is okay to wear this. I feel like a human in this, not some stiff robot weirdo. And you can wear it all day long and still feel fresh at the end of it, no matter what you're doing. You go on a date, you need a dress shirt for something, you got a happy hour, you're out with your friends, like whatever. The Roan commuter shirt is up to the challenge. The commuter shirt can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to roan.com/Jeff and use the promo code Jeff to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/Jeff and use the code Jeff. It's time to find your corner office comfort. Hey, hi, we're back. During the break, Google shut down Stadia. Or announced that they are shutting down Stadia. I am reading this story right now. This is courtesy of The Verge. But I guess there's a blog post from Google about it, which we'll take a look at here in a sec. The service will remain live for players until January 18th, 2023. Google will be refunding all Stadia hardware purchased through the Google Store, as well as all the games and add-on content purchased from the Stadia Store. Wow. Google expects those refunds will be completed in mid-January. So, okay, they will Stadia Pro subscriptions will not be eligible for a refund, but you will not be charged during the shutdown period and can access games you might have redeemed as a Pro user until everything is wound down. The store is down, so you cannot buy games or in-game transactions any longer. Okay. Yep. Yeah, that's... Well, look, that seems like the right way to go with... I mean, everyone getting refunds and all that sort of stuff seems like that is better than I expected for the end of Stadia, you know? I figured that there would be an element of like customers left holding the bag, or that Google would have to negotiate with like another service, whether that's, you know, like what's the one-to-one service that would have every game that was on Google Stadia? Like it's probably Steam, right? So I thought maybe they'd be like, oh, here's Steam keys for everything, and we'll give you a 3-month subscription to GeForce Now or something like that to play them in case you don't own a computer. Or whatever. And so refunds on the hardware, but refunds on everything except for your like premium membership money is yeah, and those will be made, the refunds will happen automatically through the Google and Stadia stores. You won't need to return your hardware. That's interesting. And unsurprising, well, I guess it's unsurprising that Stadia is no longer, or that Stadia is going to go away. I mean, that's, of course, like Stadia never really gathered much of a fan base. Like, God, remember that initial announcement? They were just out there just like, and you're going to be able to like tap into YouTube and do this, and you're going to like all this cloud, you're going to be able to make all this stuff happen. And here's all this stuff this technology is going to empower and enable, and, you know, everything is going to be made a reality by the power of the cloud. And like their big long thing about how they're changing gaming and all the games that can be developed only in the cloud and all this, and none of that ever happened. I think the closest they came to it is there was the one thing where you could have like your friends, like if you were playing co-op, you could have their screen in the corner. And I want to say one of the Ubisoft like Tom Clancy games took advantage of that, but I never actually saw it in person because it happened so late that like who was thinking about Stadia? No one. Yeah, so let's see here. I'm looking through the blog post from Phil Harrison. For many years, Google has invested across multiple aspects of the gaming industry. Yeah, I guess. Help developers build and distribute gaming apps on Google Play and Google Play games. Okay, yeah, I guess. Okay, on mobile, yes. Okay, Google is a factor, of course. A few years ago, we also launched a consumer gaming service, Stadia. And while Stadia's approach to streaming games for consumers was built on a strong technology foundation, it hasn't gained the traction with users that we expected, so we've made the difficult decision to begin winding down our Stadia streaming service. We're grateful to all the dedicated Stadia players that have been with us from the start. We'll be refunding all hardware purchases made through the Google Store, all game and add-on content through the Stadia Store. Players will have access to their games library through January 18th, so they can complete final play sessions. Ooh. Let's see, and they've got a fact about it that we'll look at as well. The underlying technology platform that powers Stadia has been proven at scale and transcends gaming. We see clear opportunities to apply this technology across other parts of Google, like YouTube, Google Play, and our augmented reality efforts, as well as make it available to our industry partners, which aligns with where we see the future of gaming headed. We remain deeply committed to gaming, and we will continue to invest in new tools, technologies, and platforms that power the success of developers, industry partners, cloud customers, and creators. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot you can do with cloud technology. I mean, let's not be dumb about it. I mean, you know, there's even stuff like hey, we're video editors working together, and through the power of the cloud, we don't have to like send renders back and forth. We can kind of both chop away at this video, and, you know, like there's a lot of interesting different applications of streaming technology to, you know, non-gaming situations, like, of course, and a lot of those are exciting, like ones that don't require the latency of a game, you know, and all that sort of stuff. But I guess, like, you know, if you think about it, like Stadia was kind of cursed from the get-go. I remember prior to launch, even like hearing from people that were taking meetings with Google, and Google was coming into meetings like they were Google. and like they were the biggest deal around, and like you need to do a deal with us because we're Google and this and that, and not coming into it going like, yeah, we're new to this type of gaming, we're new to this space, like, you know, hey, we got this crazy pitch, we think it would be, you know, there was no humility, but more importantly, like the deals they were offering always sounded like fucking shit to me. Not that I'm some deals expert, but it felt like everyone that was relaying details to me about like what Google offered them, they were incredulous at how fucking terrible it was. And they were like, yeah, we kind of laughed our way out of the meeting because like they, or you know, especially like devs that were doing like free to play, you know, obviously that's a major a major growth area for video games, whether you like it or not. These free to play games, the Fortnites and whatnot, the Google had no answer for that style of game because their model was built on you paying them for games. So a free to play game then becomes a drag on their resources with nothing in return, because then you're just using their cloud streaming technology, their racks, all that other stuff to play your game, and maybe you're not spending any money at all. You know, they could have said like, oh, if you're a Google Stadia Pro member, we'll let you play Fortnite, but you know, maybe Epic had wanted nothing to do with it. Who knows? But like they're just, you know, that was kind of the other piece of it, was like a lot of devs working in free to play, taking meetings with Google and just going like, yeah, they don't have a plan for it. They have no idea what to do. They like their plan is nah, which seemed at the time very out of step with, you know, how some of the bigger games in the business were going, right? So yeah, I don't know. From the get-go, it just felt like that they had the, you know, potentially the right product, but at the wrong time and with the wrong approach, you know, and so Stadia never felt like it had a shot from a business perspective. Using it, I remember using it when it first came in, and, you know, and like, I think the controller was terrible and all that sort of stuff, and I rarely used it that specific way with because they had a, you know, you could get the Google, whatever the puck, the whatever streaming device, Chromecast. You get their Chromecast, and then tether the controller. You know, you don't even tether the controller is Wi-Fi, so with the controller talks directly to the game through the internet and not first to the streaming puck and then up. Anyway, there were like novel ideas in there and stuff that like sounded really good on paper, but like the latency was still the latency, no matter what. And anyone that's a discerning game player is going to feel that latency and not like it. And so it becomes like a you know, and this, I feel this way about all the streaming stuff, the xCloud stuff and Amazon Luna, which I think still exists in some form, is that, you know, it becomes a game of how much are you willing to accept? How willing are you to accept a reduced experience in exchange for the convenience of being able to play these games anywhere, whether that's on your phone, or in a web browser, or on your TV through a streaming device instead of an expensive console, like all of that sort of stuff. If you're the sort of consumer that wants to play those games but is entirely unwilling to invest in a console, which now that I'm saying that out loud doesn't really sound like that much of the market these days, then maybe this is for you. Like if you like to play mobile games but you think they're too small and want to step up and you want to play console quality games on your phone, this was a way you could do that, you know. But then, of course, Apple being Apple never allowed that stuff to natively appear on iOS devices. You know, and this is something Microsoft has to deal with as well. Like, you know, you can do it through a browser. You can like what you can download. Do you have to download Edge? Anyway, there's a way to do it through your browser and all that sort of stuff on iOS, but it's a hassle. It's not, you know, if you could just tap the Xbox button and have access to your xCloud games, or tap a Stadia button and have access to your Stadia games, like that's a much more low friction experience than all the hoops you had to jump through on iOS to make that a reality. And Apple did that. That is one of the. There are some areas in the whole like Epic versus Apple thing where I think Apple is on the right track and should preserve some aspect of the way they make their service, and there are some aspects of it that I think are absolute bullshit, and that Epic is right, and that Apple needs to be more open. This is one of those cases, like them not allowing any of these cloud services to appear. It's just like they've made it a hassle, and to their to the betterment of their business, I guess. Maybe they snuffed out another Google initiative, not single-handedly. Google screwed Google when it comes to Stadia. Make no mistake, but Apple certainly didn't help. Let's see what this Stadia announcement FAQ has to say here. Let's see. January 18th is the shutdown. We anticipate that there will be some gameplay issues during this period, especially any games requiring commerce. But the majority of games should continue to work normally. What about my game progress? Can I take my game progress to another platform? While that may be possible for some games that support cross-progression play on other platforms, unfortunately, for the majority of games, that won't be possible. So they're not going to let you download your saves or anything like that. Who knows if those saves are even stored in a format that would be usable. And the number, again, what's the number of people that are affected here? Is it worth any developer to do the work to, patch in last minute like save export stuff? Probably not. Most hardware purchases made directly from Google will not need to be returned. More details on how to obtain a refund for your Stadia hardware purchases will be posted in the coming weeks. Our intent is to have the majority of refunds processed by January 18th. We will not be refunding Stadia Pro subscriptions. We have closed the Stadia store. I no longer have the form of payment I used to make the purchase. How will I get a refund? Keep an eye out for an email from us. I paid with a gift card and have since thrown it away. Keep an eye out for an email from us. I ordered something via pre-order. Will I get charged? All future pre-orders will be canceled and you will not be charged. Who is that? What? Who pre-ordered? There was nothing you had to pre-order for Stadia at this point, right? They're like, oh, you want one? Yes, we do happen to have them in stock. They're very limited, though. We're certainly not sitting on a warehouse of these things. Can I return hardware to physical locations such as Google Store, Best Buy, etc.? No, physical locations will not be able to process any returns or refunds. So I guess I guess they did get Stadia kits into Best Buy. Is what I'm reading. Is what I'm taking from this. I assumed it was always something that was only sold by Google because who would want to touch it? Yeah, it's Google went through the process of shutting down their in-house development a while back. When was that? Let's find out here. That was February of 2021. I'm sorry. Yeah, February 1st of 2021. They said that they were shutting down all the in-house development. And yeah, I mean, even before then, it wasn't like people were like, this Stadia thing, they're really onto something. People were like, this Stadia thing is going to shut down someday. And now we know the day, January 18th. So, that makes sense. I think that their approach, and I think that to a certain extent, Amazon's approach don't make any sense at all. I think the Amazon Luna approach is similarly cursed. They do things a little bit differently because it's a subscription service. So rather than purchasing one-off games and stuff like that, as you are subscribing to the main Luna channel. And then I believe they also have a Ubisoft channel that is effectively you bringing your Ubisoft Plus subscription into the service and using it to play their games via Amazon's cloud stuff. The Luna stuff was not, the game selection I thought was pretty bad. And I am not a Ubisoft Plus subscriber, so I did not experience that end of the service. But the latency, all that stuff was the same as it is everywhere. It's like, yep, this is noticeable. And, again, if you're the sort of person that is not dedicated to video games enough, in which case you're never going to hear this podcast, I suspect. But if you are sort of the casual player, you're going to be like, I'm playing these games and maybe not know the difference and all that sort of stuff, to which I say, good for you. Keep that as long as you can, I guess. But yeah, Luna was no better. xCloud, I feel like the whatever the heck they're calling it now, it's still in a beta, right? It's not like they they still use the word beta on the xCloud, on the Xbox Game Pass streaming, whatever the full name of that thing is. That seems like the best approach, because it's like, hey, you probably have an Xbox already, and you probably have ways to play those games that are not in the cloud, but we're here if you need us. If you want to demo a game without downloading it, if you want to play on the road when you don't have your Xbox, we're here for you. Like, that seems like the best case scenario for that type of streaming stuff, because there's an alternative that doesn't feel like crap, you know? Not that, any of these services, like I played Destiny 2 on Stadia, and you're like, you could do this. You felt it every time you went to do a turn, every time you hit the right stick, you go like, oh man, it took a little too long for my character to start turning there. And so you'd have to adjust mentally to aim at things, and it worked out okay. You could do it. It wasn't the end of the world, but again, it's not an ideal way to play that game. I'd be curious to, especially when that game added crossplay and stuff like that, if there were, how many scenarios there were where people finished raids on Stadia, and if they finished raids on Stadia while playing with players that were not on Stadia, and if those players were like, no, you need to pull the trigger like earlier, this is a timing based puzzle here, you are screwing. I wonder if any of the timing was tight enough there to prevent that from happening. I guess unsurprising that Stadia is going to die. That's, people have been calling that since before Stadia launched, and they were right. But again, I remember the PAX. It was like the PAX before Stadia came out, or it was like right after it got announced. Either way, I was at PAX and talking to developers that had taken meetings with Google and had a couple of different conversations about it. And every single one was just like them just going like, these people have no idea what they're doing. Like the people going into these meetings for Google have no idea what they're even doing. I'm like, oh, great. Like, Phil Harrison's been around the block. Like, you would expect that there would be, some form of veterancy there in terms of just like hiring people that know the game business well enough to do this stuff. But yeah, I did not hear, and I didn't hear anyone singing the praises of like, Google really gets it. They really understand what developers need. No, that was none of that. Absolutely none of that. So that just happened. I'm not going to go through. I prepped a full show on Monday for news and all that sort of stuff. But I think we'll end up probably saving a bunch of that for next week. I played the Modern Warfare 2 beta. We talked about that a little bit last week, and the second weekend for it, I thought was. So the invasion mode and the ground war mode, which takes place on bigger maps, invasion is sort of like the attrition mode in Titanfall, where you've got a bunch of AI guys in the mix, and you get different scores depending on if you're shooting at human targets or AI targets. I think that mode is incredible. I think it's a whole lot of fun, and the maps are really good for it too. It's got like fun rooftops that you can kind of hop from rooftop to rooftop to make your way from one end of the map to the other and stuff like that. So there's like sniper situations, but also it's very easy to flank those snipers and get around behind them and climb up on the building behind them and shoot them in the back of the head, which is fun as well. I came around big time on that game. In the second weekend, I guess they also increased the rate at which your perks accrue. If you remember, in this year's game, you don't just start with all your perks. You start with 2 of them, and then 2 more unlock over the course of a game. And I guess they increased that rate of unlock speed for the second weekend in a way that felt like almost making the whole thing pointless, because it felt like I was, unlocking the 3rd and 4th perks like almost immediately. So why not just give them to players out of the gate? I don't know. It's just like the slow rate of accrual felt weird in some ways. But the weekend 2 stuff kind of made the whole system feel a little bit pointless. So I don't know. It's a weird system. I don't know where they'll land on that in terms of unlock speeds and all that sort of stuff. But playing it on PC looks nice. Looks nice enough, I guess, and runs as you'd expect. Still does the thing where every time there's an update, it has to restart the whole game. Someday they'll overhaul whatever weird vestigial piece of that engine prevents them from having a softer, more graceful update process on PC. But not today. I mean, it's still there's still probably some Quake netcode in there, right? I mean, they probably haven't gotten it all out. It still connects to Demonware and all that stuff. Activision bought Demonware a while back, and all. Anyway, I am looking forward to Modern Warfare 2. I hope that the final game has a lot of really good maps in it. That's the thing about it, is like there were some. I was a little mixed on the competitive multiplayer mode maps. There were some that were pretty good, some that were not. And then the bigger mode, the ground war, and the invasion mode maps, which I think is just repurposed Warzone stuff. Like, it's just, here's a section of the Warzone map cordoned off for you. I think that's what they're doing. I'm not positive. But I might actually be totally wrong on that. I have no idea. But yes, that those maps were pretty good as well. A lot of fun. So what do I figured I'd talk a little bit more about news, but then I thought, as a fun treat, that I would put in a chunk of maybe the first hour and a half or so of the first episode of Game Boys to Men, which is the Patreon exclusive podcast I've been doing with Glenn Rubenstein. We're looking to have, we'll see. I mean, with me being sick here, that'll probably affect the schedule a little bit. Trying to get that on a schedule of one episode every 2 weeks. We've got a few of those out now, and we're due to record one next week, pending me feeling normal. But the first episode of that, we go over a lot of ground, and including Glenn's time as an expert witness for Galoob in the Game Genie versus Nintendo trial, where Nintendo tried to snuff out the Game Genie, which was a ridiculous concept, and Glenn ended up being a witness for Galoob in there. So we talk about what it's like to be an expert witness at age 15. And we get into some of the other stuff around our illustrious public access television career and so on and so forth. But yeah, so I'm going to give way to that in a little bit here, and you can check that out. That is a Patreon exclusive. You head over to patreon.com/Jeff Gerstmann for more details on how to sign up for that. And get access to additional episodes of that, as well as the Jeff Gerstmann Hall of Fame. An ad-free version of this very podcast is available as well at the $5 tier, which is a steal. That's what they say in the business. It's a steal. I feel very disoriented. I've also had no caffeine, almost no caffeine, since I got sick. But I thought, since my taste buds I was going to look for a more heinous drink, but I don't think I have any. I just have one of these pineapple coconut Rockstar Recoveries. I thought I would pop one of those open and give it a try and see what it tasted like with my weird mutant taste buds. Everything's different. Everything's different. It's like there's a stronger pineapple flavor on the front end of it than there used to be. Like a weird tang that wasn't there before. Like that, the pineapple kind of, that is hitting me harder, but then the coconut, the suntan lotion vibe comes through a lot stronger too. Man, we may have to throw out, if assuming, if my taste comes back and it's normal and it's fine, then we're fine. But if it doesn't, and I've seen some people say that it hasn't been the same since, maybe we need to retire the energy drink rankings and start all over again. I don't know. It might not be fair to compare my palate to what it used to be. That's really scary. It's a really alarming concept that I'm saying out loud right now, that might be. Anyway, let's talk about a little bit of news here. The first trailer. Hang on, we've got music for this. Hang on. Why don't we take another ad break, and then we'll come back and we'll get into this news. I forgot that we had one of those. Be right back. Hey, how often do you change your bed sheets, your pillowcases, your comforters, all that sort of stuff? I'm going to go ahead and guess the answer is not often enough. Did you know that traditional bed sheets can harbor more bacteria than a toilet seat? It's true. It can lead to acne, allergies, stuffy noses, and it's just gross. Miracle Brand offers a whole line of self-cleaning, eco-friendly bedding, such as sheets, pillowcases, and comforters, that prevent 99% of bacteria and require 3 times less laundry. Now that's nice. What else can the Miracle Brand sheets do for you? I'm glad you asked. These sheets have self-cooling properties. Using silver-infused fabrics originally developed by NASA, Miracle Brand sheets are thermoregulating and designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night long so you get better sleep every night. And again, that silver is not just there for show. It's not just there so you can say, check out my fancy sheets. These silver-infused sheets prevent 99.9% of that bacterial growth, leaving them to stay cleaner and fresher 3 times longer than other sheets and less stink, which is nice. And hey, it would be pointless if these things were scratchy, horrible feeling bed sheets, but no, luxurious comfort and quality, check. Miracle sheets are luxuriously comfortable without the high price tag of other luxury brands. These sheets use a premium 500 thread count sateen weave. That's right. It's made with USA grown Supima cotton, which is one of the highest quality cottons in the world. So stop sleeping on bacteria. Clean sheets means less bacteria to clog up your pores, fewer breakouts, and other skin problems. Go to trymiracle.com/Jeff to try it today. And there's a special deal going on right now for you. Be sure to use the promo code Jeff at checkout to save 40% and get 3 free towels. Miracle is so confident in their product. It's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Brand. Go to trymiracle.com/Jeff and use the code Jeff to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/Jeff. And thanks to Miracle Brand for sponsoring the episode. Okay, we're back, and let's hear about the news. Super Mario Brothers, the movie. What are they even? That's whatever they're calling this one. It's just Super Mario Brothers, right? The Chris Pratt-led Super Mario Brothers film is going to get its first trailer. This is next week, a week from today, October 6th. It will be shown at the New York Comic-Con. I assume that they will put it online and it won't be one of those like, you had to be there, man, and now you get to see it off someone's shitty phone. Do you think Mario will speak in the trailer? I do not. I think they'll, why not lean into it at this point and have the trailer end with Mario starting to go, and then boom, Super Mario Brothers, the movie, whatever it is. Or sing, or, whatever the hell it is. Yeah, they're billing it as a teaser trailer. No further details beyond that at this time, but that'll be something we can talk about pretty soon here. I am curious to see it, but it's like I feel like what that movie's going to look like, right? We've seen enough polygonal Mario to know it'll probably just look like that, but like full frame rate or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I don't know. Skull and Bones got delayed again. Why not? They're delaying it because the game is not okay. This is actually maybe a little bit interesting. Allow me to cough for a moment. Delicious. They posted an image to Twitter that reads, "Important news to all of our aspiring captains. Today we'd like to give you an update regarding the release date. Although Skull and Bones' development is finished at this stage, the invaluable feedback received during our various technical tests and insider program convinced us we could use a bit of extra time to polish and balance the experience even further and ensure you all get the best experience we can offer. We have therefore decided to push our initial launch date to March 9th, 2023, We will be organizing more Insider Program sessions to continue gathering feedback. And in case you haven't had the chance to participate yet, you can also look forward to our open beta in the near future. Thank you for your support, and stay tuned for more information. That sounds brutal to me. Of like, yeah, the game's done, but we got a lot of feedback on our technical test that says maybe it's not. Though, you know, maybe because if this was like minor tweaks and stuff like that, I think that they would just ship and try to make the tweaks as fast as they can, instead of pushing the game back yet again, though this is still within the same fiscal year, I guess. This to me sounds more like, hey, we let a bunch of people play it and maybe they don't like it, and we're going to try to do what we can in the next few months here to try to get people to like it more. I'm just guessing there, but usually when you're getting feedback this late on a game, it must have been pretty direct. It must have been pretty severe for them to go like, no, we need to address this stuff. We have to address this stuff. We'll see. I don't know. That game's been pushed back and been shown off and on so many times that it's easy to assume that it's a mess. I don't know. Another mess. The Rockstar, the GTA 6 hacks, the release of information related to the upcoming next Grand Theft Auto game. This is old news at this point, but you know, hey, bear with me. I've been busy coughing. They arrested somebody in the city of London. A 17-year-old was arrested in Oxfordshire. Oxfordshire. You say all fast. Anyway, he has been charged with 2 counts of breach of bail conditions and 2 counts of computer misuse, according to Video Games Chronicle. And he will appear at Highbury Corner Youth Court on Saturday, September 24th. Oh, so that already happened. Let's see. Police have not commented on it. Journalist Matthew Keyes cited sources that the teenager in question, who's reportedly known as just AK, the initials, because of his age, was arrested in relation to that attack along with another on Uber. So, yeah, the cops haven't come out and said this was the Rockstar kid. But okay, well, let's see here. There's also a story from Eurogamer from a couple of days after that. The 17-year-old suspect believed to be behind the recent hack of Rockstar Games has pled not guilty to the charge of computer misuse. The teen did plead guilty to breaching bail conditions. So that was after his court appearance. He's now being held in a youth detention center. And he is believed to be part of a hacking group that has been making quite the name for themselves over the years here. And that's kind of about it in terms of the information. But it is believed that this is the kid that did the Rockstar stuff, and they got him fast, which is, yeah, I don't know. Like, if you think about it, like a lot of the hacking, quote unquote, you know, it's really social engineering. So, you know, you get a 17-year-old that is full of enough confidence and can bullshit his way through a phone call and sound enough like an adult and all that sort of stuff to talk some poor sap into, you know, okaying a 2-factor authentication credential and all that sort of stuff. Like, you know, it's certainly a skill. It's certainly a people skill and all that sort of stuff. But when we talk about hacking, I think people immediately think like, oh, they exploited this and did this and have this extreme know-how. And like, yeah, you know, there's certainly computer know-how there. Like, make no mistake. Like, I'm not, you know, doubting this 17-year-old's skills or whatever. But, you know, it's largely a social engineering thing. And that's, in some ways, I think, harder for people at that age to get over the hump on in terms, I know when I was that age, having to, when you would call BBSs that had pornography or you know, illegal software or whatever, you know, there were a lot of times that the person running the board would want to voice verify you, and they would call you on the phone. You would fill out the form saying, yes, I would like to be a member of your your bulletin board. I want to be able to post here and download files and whatnot. And then they would go like, cool, you've got limited access until voice verification. And then they would call you up and be like, hey, what's your story? And you would have to sound enough like an adult or sound like not an idiot. And then they would determine if you got access or not. I went through a couple of those and pulled it off, but it was always super terrifying. You know, it was like, oh man, an adult's going to call me on the phone and ask me if I want the porno. And I have to be like, hello, yes, I want the porno. Yes, I love adult related files because I am an adult like me, like you. We are adults having adult conversations about pornography. I like the good stuff. Boobs and whatnot. And I fumbled my way through a couple of those and made it out the other side. But you know, the idea of having the confidence to call someone up and just straight up like, yeah, hi, I'm with the support team. We're having a problem with our 2-factor stuff. If you could just click OK on one of those, the notices will stop. We're sorry about this. We're working long hours trying to get it done. Yeah, no, I know. Hey, crazy times. Anyway, all right, cool, man. Thanks. Like that conversation seems like so much more difficult to have. When I was 17, I would not have been able to be that level of social engineer for sure. So anyway, yeah, that information got leaked out, and now this kid is gonna probably go to court again over it. It sounds like that this kid had already gotten popped over something else, so he's got bail conditions around computer use, which is pretty par for the course for some of these kids that get wrapped up in these hacking groups and hacking scenes and stuff like that. But we'll see where this ends up leading. If they end up kind of, I don't know. I assume this goes to court and he'll hear the full details, whether this is the kid that did the Uber and the GTA stuff as seems to be the case, or if this is somehow wrong. We will have to wait and see. But that's the way that reads right now. So, yeah, I'm just kind of glossing over making sure I'm not missing anything here, and just giving it a quick once over. Okay. The teen was one of 7 arrested under suspicion of hacking other high-profile companies such as Microsoft before bragging about it online, says the Eurogamer story, which, yeah. And the FBI is looking into several additional members of this hacking group around the Uber hack. City police confirm. Okay, this is according to Matthew Keys, who is Matthew Keys? An award-winning journalist who covers tech media and local news. In Northern California. Okay, that's weird. All right. Anyway, City Police, City of London confirms the 17-year-old arrested. Source says the crime is related to intrusion on Rockstar Games and possibly Uber. Okay, so he's got a source that says that this is the Rockstar kid, but also possibly the Uber kid, from the sounds of things. And that's, yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, and it sounds like the FBI is taking a look at additional people around that sort of stuff. So we'll see if there's any further arrests on that. Yeah, I don't know. This kind of seems like and then when we talk about it in terms of impact for the game industry and so on and so forth, other than everyone getting a very sternly worded email from their IT department about how to, and being forced to go through more abysmal IT training videos and training courses and all that sort of stuff. This is not something that's going to have a long-term impact on the development of Grand Theft Auto. They said as much, but of course it's unless they had access to all sorts of weird stuff that would be used in anti-cheat or some sort of stuff that would be used in relation to user accounts with the existing GTA Online, which it sounds like was not the case. That this isn't something that's going to have a lasting impact on the game, and by the time the game comes out, we will have long forgotten about all this sort of stuff. Other than like an article comparing, remember those assets? Here's how they showed up in the final game. Like whatever it is. We're probably not going to hear too much more about GTA for quite some time. until they're ready to have something more substantial to show, and probably a release window and some other stuff like that as well. But until they have that sort of stuff ready to say publicly, we're probably not going to see much from them for a while. All right, that's going to do it for news. We'll get into. I'll save some of these stories for the following week. There's the Embracer CEO talking about Saints Row and how disappointed he was by the sales, and some other bits and pieces like that. But all this talking, like I am heating up over the course of this thing. Like I am feeling worse as I speak. So I'm going to take that as a sign and quit while I'm ahead here. So yeah, I should be back on Tuesday, barring, any kind of further health stuff. I'm feeling mostly okay, but I haven't even been talking for an hour and I'm already feeling kind of like, whew, okay. Whew. So we'll kind of see where that gets to over the next handful of days here. Right. And as I said, I'm gonna give way here to a chunk of the first episode of Game Boys to Men, which is available for $10 patrons over at patreon.com/Jeff Gerstmann. Please take a look over there. If you find the offering appealing, sign on up. And you can get access to an ad-free version of this show, the early access to the Jeff Gerstmann Hall of Fame. You can get on the advisory panel, which I am going to start polling them here in the coming weeks as we start to figure out what I'm and maybe not over the last few days because I've been preoccupied, but I've been figuring out like what are we going to do for game of the year type stuff around here when it comes to talking about the best games of the year. I want the advisory panel to pick a game of the year and all that sort of stuff, and talk about their favorite games as well, and find ways to integrate that in. So that is one of the Patreon tier offerings and stuff. You get access to the Discord where a lot of people are talking about a lot of different things 24/7, from the Steam Deck to awful AI generated images to, of course, wrestling and anime, and a whole lot of video game talk. I know it's weird, but that's how it's going. Anyway, you get the rest of the run of Game Boys to Men over at patreon.com/Jeff Gerstmann. Enjoy this first episode where we talk about Nintendo and their kind of initial rise to power here in the States, and them flexing it against poor Galoob, the Cubert people. No, that's Gottlieb, different company. Poor Galoob and their fledgling little toy, the Game Genie. I'll see you next week. Bye. Welcome, everybody. It's Game Boys to Men, the first proper episode. I'm Jeff Gerstmann, joined by Glenn Rubenstein. Glenn, how's it going?
It is going, sir. Good to be here.
Great. Awesome. This, in case you missed the introductory episode, this is a podcast where Glenn and I are going to kind of walk down a lot of different memory lanes over the last 30-ish years of video games. Glenn got started writing for newspapers in I guess the 1990 was it 1990.
Yes.
And then I kind of got roped into all this stuff. We'll go over how Glenn roped me into all of this stuff, and so on and so forth as we go through this podcast. This time around, we are talking about Nintendo, and specifically kind of the NES era of Nintendo and their kind of rise to prominence and how they saved video games, I guess.
Yes, without them, we would probably not be here talking about this right now.
Yeah, like someone would have eventually come along and found a way to bring video games to the North American market, but maybe not in the dominant way that they did. The Nintendo Entertainment System is it's a hell of a machine. There's some classic video games, but I don't know. Nintendo was a name I already knew about from the arcade days, and some of the home versions of those arcade games. Like I was a big, going to arcades and stuff like that. I was a big Donkey Kong Jr. fan. I liked Popeye a lot. Did you have any memories of Nintendo kind of prior to the NES?
Yeah, I mean, Ice Climber was a big one. That was at our local Safeway.
Okay.
Donkey Kong 3, I was a big fan of.
Yeah.
Always enjoyed that. I remember the original Mario Brothers, and then Punch Out. You know, the Play Choice 10 machine. I feel I have a great fondness
Yeah.
for that.
I want to say the Play Choice 10 might have come. So they did a couple of different, they brought NES games to arcades in a couple of different ways.
Yes.
There was like the Versus system, which is the first time I saw Super Mario Brothers running, it was at a 7-Eleven, and it was on one of these Versus machines, which at the time you didn't know what a Nintendo was. So it was just like, oh, what's this? They made a sequel to Mario Brothers, and oh my God, it's huge and crazy. What the hell is going on? Like, it was such a confusingly large video game compared to so much of what was out there in arcades. It was just, it felt out of place, and I was like obsessed with it. Like, we didn't go to that 7-Eleven. It was the 7-Eleven up on the hill past the Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
They had it there.
Yes.
And my dad and I would stop there when we would go out to the shooting range to shoot guns. And
as opposed to going under freeway overpasses.
yes, exactly. Yeah. As opposed to going to the outside edge of town and shooting at stop signs, we went and legally shot at actual shooting ranges. And yeah, like I would demand that we like stayed there for a while. Be like, no, just let me get one more quarter, while he was, buying, something to drink or whatever it was before we went out there. And it was just crazy how large that game was, especially like thinking about like Mario Brothers as a single screen game. Like, Nintendo had been known for these kind of single screen, or if you ever found like a Game & Watch, it was like, oh, these are like dual screen or whatever. But like these very, they were very typical arcade games for the era. And so like Super Mario Brothers felt so expansive that it didn't make sense as an arcade game. And again, I wouldn't realize until years later that it's like, oh, that's because it wasn't an arcade game. It was a home game that they crammed into arcade cabinets and all of this other stuff. But yeah, like Donkey Kong 3, hell of a game, doesn't get the credit it deserves. And then a lot of those home ports, like Nintendo would outsource a lot of those games. Atari did Donkey Kong for its platforms, and I think Coleco had the Donkey Kong license for the 2600 or whatever it was. But there's a lot of weird versions of those games out there too. And so the Nintendo brand, Punch Out was crazy.
Think about this for a second though. Remember Donkey Kong, remember Pac-Man, even Gauntlet, where it was same gameplay mechanic, different screen. And with Punch Out, you had these unique characters they were going up against in each round. And in the arcade, it would be that thing where if I wasn't playing it, I wanted to watch to see how many characters I could discover to see how far somebody progressed. And I think you hit the nail on the head that Nintendo was doing with these Famicom ports of the arcade. They were doing deeper arcade games than what we were used to seeing, which made it an interesting gateway to the console system.
Yeah, and Punch Out is a really interesting case because I remember when Mike Tyson's Punch Out would hit, thinking like, oh, this is really cool, but it's like really trashy compared to the arcade version, which didn't have Mike Tyson, but it had, it was like you had this big grid version of your boxer, and like the characters were so large, and it had dual screens, so you had like the life bars and all this other stuff up top, and that game was so crazy. It just felt so big, because it was bigger than a lot of other arcade games. And so yeah, when Punch Out came home and it was like this more traditional kind of just like it felt a lot smaller to me. Still a great game, but it felt like it lost a step in the conversion, I guess.
Yeah, I was reading last night because I'm a huge Punch Out fan. I actually never played the Wii release. Was that a remake of the arcade game, or the?
No, they did a new Punch Out kind of, in that same style of gameplay and all that other stuff. Canadian developer worked on that. I think they later would go on to acquire.
No Tyson.
No Tyson. I mean, they, look, they.
I know. I get it.
I mean, they had to reissue Punch Out without Tyson in it on the NES because they did not renew that license and all that sort of stuff. And
now, hear me out on this. We remake it, but we actually have it be Cannabis, and we have Tyson as his coach.
Okay, I like it. Yeah,
like hyping him up.
So like between rounds, you hit the select button. He goes, "It's the Cannabis Man. You're gonna get out there. You're gonna eat thief."
And LL's the final boss.
Okay, yeah,
it all makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like the Def Jam people, I think, have been trying to find a way to bring that license back to video games, and so maybe this is finally the way. Is a backdoor Def Jam reboot by way of Punch Out, by way of Cannabis. It's finally the ultimate.
And Eminem ghost writes all the lyrics.
Sure.
Yeah, why not?
for LL.
For LL.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, but it's interesting, man. So in prep for this, we both watched Console Wars. You hadn't seen it before.
I hadn't seen it before. Yeah.
I read the book. I've been in touch with Blake Harris. In fact, we're going to show some footage today. Too hot for Console Wars. Blake was like, dude, send me your old TV appearances. And I watched these and I was like, oh, hell no, these are not going in a documentary. I do not want this out there. But for Jeff Gerstmann Patreon subscribers, you're going to get the full awkward years of Glenn Rubenstein experience today.
Yeah. 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 Console Wars was interesting. When I first started watching it, I was like, oh man, I hate this. And as I kind of got most of the way through it, I started to appreciate it. It's one of those documentaries that if you kind of already know the subject matter, it doesn't really have a lot for you. It's really a retelling of the rise of Sega in a lot of ways, and that stuff, and how Nintendo reacted to that. And I think that's by the time I got to like the last like half hour of it, I was like, no, this is actually pretty good. It's just not for me. Like I've been living this stuff too long.
Yeah.
And so I know most of this through osmosis at this point. But it was nice to hear the anecdotes from the people who were there and see like, oh, well, yeah, I haven't, what is Ellen Beth Van Buskirk doing now? And all the, look at Tom Kalinske, all this, like all these people that you and I met in this era.
Yeah. Not just met. I mean, it's like Sega, and we'll tell these stories when we do the Rise of Sega episode. It's like, I was looking at Ellen Beth and Al Nielsen, and thinking about Doug Glenn and Tom Kalinske, and I'm like, oh, these people had to put up with a lot of our shit.
Oh yeah,
back in the 90s. I mean, Nintendo, Howard Lincoln. We'll talk about some of the stories there. But today's purpose, what we really wanted to talk about is sort of our lens of Nintendo and that experience of Nintendo coming to prominence, Nintendo losing the grip. But then I think what's interesting, and they didn't touch on this in Console Wars at all, was the Game Genie trial, which I was actually an expert witness in.
Yeah.
And man, after, I don't know how Nintendo didn't like put a hit out on me after that.
Yeah, the idea that like you were in that trial and then they were still like, well, I don't know, he still writes for these newspapers. I guess we gotta, it was before, people were not getting cut off to the same degree, especially mainstream journalists like you were at the time. Because I remember Andy Eddy writing a long, and I should find this issue, but like his letter from the editor in Video Games and Computer Entertainment around the time of the Game Genie coming out. Nintendo cut them off because they were like, no, we think the Game Genie is cool. We think this stuff is good. And now we're not getting Nintendo products. And I want you, the reader, to know that. Like, it's that letter from the editor that like has been written a handful of times over the years for different reasons. When someone just goes like, here's why you're not going to see, timely reviews of this company's products on this outlet is because of this. And it's always that last ditch, like, oh, we tried to, we tried to mend this relationship and fuck it.
Do you remember, I pitched this at GameSpot back early on, and everybody thought, it was like, no, this couldn't be done. As I said, well, if we want to be the most credible outlet, why don't we not accept anything for free and make our thing be that we buy our own games, like we are the most unbiased source? And everyone was like, you couldn't even afford that. We need access. We need to be able to scoop IGN. Remember like the crazy turf war with IGN and GameSpot back in the days,
you don't even know. Like after you were gone, that turf war became times 100, but yeah, the access journalism, the like we are getting these games early, all that other stuff, but GameSpot did at least try to not accept travel.
Yeah.
And that sort of stuff.
That'll be a whole other episode where we talk about Playola, the hot button issue.
Yes. We'll talk about when will we talk about the Nintendo train?
Oh my God.
That's more of a SNES episode, right?
Yeah. The return of Nintendo Strikes Back. I believe we made a document, folks. We made a Google Doc where we started putting in all these ideas for episodes and a chronology. And I think we're going to be doing this for a few years.
Yeah. There's there's kind of a lot in the 90s even. Yeah. So, but yeah, you could do that. You could say, hey, we're not gonna go request any product. We're not going to accept any product. I know different outlets have tried to do like, well, we're not going to ever talk off the record. We're never going to have an off the record conversation. We're never going to sign an NDA, all that other stuff. And they've gone out there and broken stories and done pretty well, and they've gotten cut off from some companies and others. And I don't know. Yeah, I think it is, especially when you think about GameSpot being founded by 3 guys with like a loan from one of their fathers and some others, some other stuff like that. I don't know where all the money actually came from.
An actor from Melrose Place who played Dr. Thomas Mancini was one of the investors.
No
in GameSpot
kidding.
Originally.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they went out and found whoever it was that they found. I know Vince Brotti's father, I think, was also someone who got paid off when the company sold to Ziff Davis. But yeah, there were a handful of people, and yeah, they did not have the resources to just go out and buy every game. And it was the web. I mean, the whole point was to try to be faster than everybody else and credible and all that sort of stuff. Man, okay, no, all right, not to go.
I know.
I'm like in the process of getting angry at the EIC of computer gaming world all over again because of some shit he said when.
So Nintendo,
yes,
the reason why we're here. Let's go to when the NES was released. So we know in late '85, I believe, FAO Schwartz.
Yeah, in New York, and then so it launched in '83 in Japan. So think about that. Like the same year that here in the States we were watching the console market fall apart. The 2600 was, a shambles. The market was contracting in a major way. People were like, "Oh, guess it was a fad," and running away from video games at full speed. Nintendo was launching the Famicom in Japan, and then they took a couple of years of like trying to figure out like, hey, are we going to bring this thing back? They talked to Atari about marketing it. They had prototypes that looked very different from the days when they were pitching Atari on the whole thing, and they eventually hit upon this idea of what if we included a robot and tried to market it as a toy. That got some traction, and it got them to the point where they were at FAO Schwartz in New York in late '85, and then I believe early '86 they went to LA, and then eventually Chicago and San Francisco, and they were nationwide by September of '86.
Which is crazy. I mean, and I remember when I first heard about it, I guess the funny thing is for you and I is that we weren't the kids that stopped playing video games when Atari went away. In fact, I think for me, I remember buying a lot of Atari stuff on clearance, but then I just moved to PC games on like my Apple IIe for 2 or 3 years.
Exactly. Yeah. I had my Atari 800 at home, and I was playing a lot of games there because that market was still going, and those games were becoming more complicated. Like computer games simply just became more complicated. You saw some magazines of the era try to capitalize on that as the 2600 fell apart. Suddenly they'd be like, oh, hey, we're adding reviews of computer games here now, and trying to figure that out.
Video games and computer entertainment.
Exactly.
That's the reason why they had both. And I mean, credit to, I think Sierra Online was really what kept me like really like that was my next evolution into gaming. Of course, like every child wanting to get my hands on Leisure Suit Larry. Like people at school talking about Leisure Suit Larry. Like, there's a scene where you have to buy a condom. It's crazy.
I'm pretty sure you fuck in that game. Like, no, you never ever. You never fucked in that game. I tried real hard.
Gonna get Leather Goddess of the Phobos. And
I'm gonna type in have sex with alien over and over again, and it keeps not taking that as a response, and I'm just like, what are we doing here? That's why I prefer it. Yeah, this was life. And before I got a hold of a Commodore 64 and all the filth that was on there, Samantha Fox strip poker and all the, just all sorts of garbage falling out all over the place. But yes, so it was a weird thing of like arcades were still technically going, and there were still new games coming to arcades. And so it's like, maybe there was a fad aspect of it. Like kids at school stopped talking about video games. By and large, it didn't hold the sway that it used to, but that didn't mean that they weren't coming out. If you still had your friends that were playing games, like there were still games to play. And and that's Did you catch it? Did you catch a bad energy drink? Is this?
I did. I in honor of you and your energy drink aficionado Jeff Gerstmann, I got a Riot energy drink. 100% plant powered energy.
This is a vegan energy drink.
Well, I mean, I think most of them are actually.
I guess so. Yeah.
But it's cherry watermelon, and it's disgusting.
Yeah. Not me, man. This bag's full of meat.
I've been really big on this probiotic soda. So I've been drinking like Olipop and like Poppy and
your
some of these
gut
other ones.
flora and fauna. thanks you.
Hey man, I'm down like 30 pounds in the last couple months. I mean, not just this, but I figure anything to keep the stuff moving, you know?
It's not just this, it's this and methamphetamines. I mean, hey,
Hey,
listen, Petaluma is a weird place. Yeah, so yeah, the NES rolled out, and so for me it was this weird thing of like, this thing was coming out, and I knew I wanted one, and also that I discovered like, oh, Super Mario Brothers is on this thing.
Yeah.
That's the game from the 7-Eleven. I can't believe that that's going to come home. Again, not knowing that it was, you know, that it was kind of in reverse order or whatever, the actual lineage. And yeah, I got my hands on mine. I believe it was Christmas '86. And you know, the family all kind of pitched in. I ended up with like 9 games along with the system. It came with 3, because it came with Super Mario Brothers, Gyromite, and Duck Hunt. If you got the full
yeah.
like light gun and robot pack and all that sort of stuff. And then, you know, there was Excite Bike, and, you know, I think Pinball was probably out at that point. And then the one stinker of the group, as far as I was concerned, was Mock Rider, which was like a motorcycle kind of.
Sucked.
Yeah, and you could make your own courses, and that was kind of cool, but I thought it played like absolute shit, and so I returned it, and got probably a Capcom game or something like that. But yeah, those early days of the NES were crazy. It felt like that thing exploded all at once, and suddenly I knew like kids and adults that I could talk to about video games in like a real way, and it was really weird to suddenly have. Like, my dad had a bunch of people over to the house, and they had a cash tournament for golf, like regular ass NES golf. Just one Sunday, a bunch of people came over and they played it, and I entered and lost. I forget who won, but you know, they took like $150.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, but it was really popular. I mean, I remember when it first came out. So I was in Michigan at the time. We'd moved back to Michigan, which, man, talk about like living in the Bay Area in Alameda. Like, you would know somebody that knew somebody that worked for Atari, and then we went to Michigan, and it was like there is nothing. There was no access to the video game industry at all. And I remember we knew we were going to get it for Christmas, and I think we got the action pack, the one that had maybe the zapper in the system, but not the robot. I always wanted the robot. But we convinced my mom to give it to us early. That was
Smart.
like the big thing.
Yeah.
And then Mario Brothers was an absolute obsession. Excite Bike. And then, but those first games, man, it's like not only the first party stuff, but it would be, okay, somebody has Rygar, or it was like Goonies 2 was one. And I would just stay, like on weekends, I would just stay up all night, just obsessively finishing these games. And I felt like maybe the first dozen games I played, like there wasn't a single bad one, because I was either borrowing it from a friend, so I knew it was good, or, I mean, there was just so much excitement about these first titles.
Yeah, and those are both, yeah, man, Goonies 2 is so good. I can't, like, that a lot of that game still holds up today, I think, but just the big expansive world that you weren't used to seeing. You know, again, especially if you were kind of comparing it to the console stuff that came before it, like there wasn't much like that on the Atari 2600. You had you could count like E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Sword Quest games, and Pitfall 2 or something, you know, as like these are kind of open worldish or expansive area kind of games. And suddenly like Rygar was insane how big that game was. And I mean, it's much smaller now when you go back to it and read on where to go and go the right ways all the time. Rygar is not actually that long of a game, but it's oh man, that was another. There were a lot of cases there where I wasn't going to arcades as much, and also local arcades were not getting new games in as frequently as they used to. Like, I remember the Petaluma arcade when Gauntlet came out. That was such a huge hit for them that they were doing a thing where, like, if you give us $20, we will let you play Gauntlet for 3 hours. You know, and you will just get infinite quarters for 3 hours or whatever. And they were trying to sign people up that way, and it worked. Like they were doing well at that, and it was just weird. But you know, they weren't getting all these new machines. So like I didn't see a Rygar arcade machine for years, and then seeing it and going like, oh, this is just like a whatever kind of side scroller, like kind of, you know, generic game. It was like disappointing, but also like, yeah, it just made me like value those home ports so much more in so many different ways, because there was so much killer stuff. And I started renting games relatively early on too. And
Yeah, rental started when, about 88, maybe?
probably something like that. It probably didn't start off right up off the bat, because there weren't necessarily enough games in the first 6 months to really support it. But yeah, probably by
Yeah.
87 or by late 87 or 88 or something, I'm sure that Eastman Video in Petaluma was probably ready to rent you some stuff.
Now, I remember I had a friend in Michigan, and it was the classic thing now where he was like, so my mom's doing some work for Nintendo. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. Sure, buddy.
Yeah.
But no, she had a job, probably freelance through some agency. Her job was to find video stores that were renting games so Nintendo
yeah.
could send them cease and desist letters.
Right. Yeah. Good work if you can get it.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my, and I remember, like, and for me, that was like the seed of, like, maybe Nintendo's not like all on the up and up. Like, maybe I shouldn't have the warm fuzzies about them so much.
Yeah. I don't know that I ever, well, I did and I didn't. I feel like my like love affair with Nintendo as like a brand or whatever was really just based on the third party support of those first few machines. There were so many games from so many different companies coming out there, that Nintendo's own output, when it's great, and this is still the case, when it's great, it's the best in the world. But, you end up with some stuff along the way that, you're like, okay, like Gyromite. I like Gyromite. I'll say it. The Rob the Robot was kind of cool at the time. Being able to make him like turn and open his claws as long as he could see the TV was a neat idea, but we stopped using it because there was a test mode where you could just make the robot move instead of having to play Gyromite. And so we would put it in that test mode and then use it to pick up GI Joes and drop them into pits of acid or whatever else. And so Rob the Robot served most of its time as like an evil Cobra robot for us, and that was pretty cool. But yeah, it's I like Super Mario Brothers 2, and I think by the time 3 came out, because it came out pretty late in the game, all told, I was kind of done with Nintendo as a brand. But yeah, there was definitely like an era of warm fuzzies, and then that era of like, oh wait, they're suing a lot of people. Like the video store stuff, I think what they ended up settling on was a lot of video stores were photocopying the manuals for games.
Yeah.
And so that was like, oh, you're duplicating copyrighted material. And so they could definitely nail them on that. Whereas the like, can you legally rent this? Yes or no was a kind of more a gray kind of question. And so companies sprung up to produce like one sheet stick-on versions of game manuals that they wrote themselves, and that they would stick those on the plastic cases you would get with the rental. And so that was like a legal way for them to include some kind of instructions to the game without including photocopies or the original manual or anything like that. And so like, yeah, like markets sprung up around Nintendo's lawsuits in a weird way.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think for me, another turning point was when, okay, so there was the Fun Club News, and that was free. And then everybody got the first issue of Nintendo Power, and that was free. And then it was like, you have to subscribe to this. And then there was the game hint line. So, I mean, old gamers remember, it used to be free, 1-800-422-2602. And then, and this is actually, I mean, but this shows as a kid, because people today don't understand long distance used to be like, oh, I can afford long distance in a Ferrari, like, because long distance was so expensive. But when they switched to 206-885-7529 and I had to pay to call the tip line, I was indignant as a child.
Yeah, that sucked. And then I believe later on it then just became a 900 number, if I remember correctly, because they were just like, no, now we want to actively make money on this. And so
get in on Vince Brody's business.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Call 1-900-MIX-A-LOT and kick those nasty thoughts. And yeah, so, and all that stuff made sense. I remember the Nintendo Fun Club News being like the coolest thing ever, because that was the first time you saw that picture of Howard Phillips. And like you saw him playing slalom, like before slalom was even a thing. And you're like, what? He's playing some skiing game. What?
I loved slalom when it first came out.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool game.
And I remember finding a cheat in it. And this was like the first time I ever discovered a cheat. If your time ran out and you just kept jumping, it would let you keep going like all the way to the finish line.
Yeah.
And I remember really feeling like I discovered something like that.
I think the first one I discovered was either Akari Warriors for the NES, because it was just ABBA. And so if you just die and mash on the buttons for a while, you're going to stumble into that. Or Transbot for the Master System, which is just you hold down a button and it would eventually take you into some kind of weird debug menu. But yeah, the lawsuits of Nintendo, like, they felt very protective. And at first, this seemed like something that was them reacting to the problems that Atari faced. If you think about the end of the 2600, there was a glut of games on the market. Like, all these fly-by-night companies started up and they're like, we're making Atari games because we hear that that's where all the money is. And they're all shit. And here's a bunch of weird porno games, and they're all terrible too. And just the quality of the like late model 2600 game was absolutely abysmal. And so Nintendo tried to put a bunch of restrictions in place around the Nintendo seal of quality to try to keep things on the up and up, and keep like that kind of shovelware thing from happening to them. And like, I get where they were coming from, but it felt like by the end of the NES, they were really just using it as like a blunt instrument to try to, you know, maintain their grip on the video game industry. And this was something that you saw with their lawsuit against Atari. You know, Atari was making unlicensed games for the NES under the Tengen brand. Those black carts that were all sleek and cool looking, like Gauntlet and Vindicators and RBI Baseball. And they eventually settled, and eventually, you know, they came into the fold and started making licensed carts. But I remember that being a thing. There were other unlicensed manufacturers kind of flying under the radar, making a bunch of crap. And then, you know, in 1990, we have the game Genie from Camerica, from Galoob, depending on what region you were in. I think Camerica marketed it in Canada.
Yeah.
And then Codemasters actually developed it in the UK. Who went on to, you know, they're well, I think
Dizzy.
Dizzy and Micro Machines and all of that stuff. And they made unlicensed carts as well, like Stunt Kids and some of this other stuff. So they were kind of poking around at the NES and the lockout chips and all that other stuff and trying to figure out different ways to make games for that hardware. And you saw Nintendo trying to struggle and starting to fight against this sort of stuff very actively in a way that felt very weird, because none of this stuff seemed like it was, you know, from just a kid perspective, it was like, no, whatever, make more games, that's cool, everyone should make games, the Game Genie seems awesome, like all this other stuff. And so, yeah, I don't know, Nintendo at some point started seeming a lot like they were the man.
Yeah, I mean, I think I compare this a lot, and it really makes sense when you think about Sega. It's like, look at WWE and WCW, and then WWE and AEW, and it's kind of the same thing. I mean, you know, you have a huge advantage almost just by being the upstart company that's not the monolith.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And Nintendo had become that monolith based on like a ton of great games. Why don't, you know, let's talk a little bit more about games. Like, I just looking at the full NES run here. This was a great era because in addition to renting games, this was before stores had figured out like, hey, you can't return games if they're open. And so you could just go buy a game, play it for a week and a half and go, this is terrible, or this is great, but I finished it and now I'm going to take it back to the store and trade it in for something else. I remember getting Renegade, which was a port of a Taito arcade game, like a one screen beat 'em up, real basic. Like, it worked in arcades, but the home version was just, it was brutally difficult and just frustrating, and just there wasn't a lot to it. And so I remember returning that a couple of days in, and getting rid of that. We talked about Mock Rider, you know, on the unlicensed game. Did you ever see Chiller? There was an arcade version of it, but Chiller was a light gun game that was unlicensed. And so it was just like there was a torture rack sequence. It was just like, here's a bunch of axes and skulls and all this other stuff. But then there were like people strung up to torture racks being pulled in directions. You could like shoot their arm and it would tear and they would scream a little bit, I think. Or, you know, it was just like weird, you know, like it was the sort of thing that like in that era, like if politicians had seen it, it would be like, this is like Faces of Death, the video game, or, you know, or something insane like that. But
yeah. Wait till we talk about the forming
yeah.
of the ESRB episode and
Right.
testimony with the state legislature
Yeah.
on that. But no, on the opposite end of the spectrum, I remember I had a friend that had like an unlicensed like Bible video game for Nintendo.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Wisdom Tree.
I
Definitely.
was like, what is this? This
Like-
is awful.
Yeah. So there was just like a bunch of attempts at getting around Nintendo's kind of seal of quality, or getting around Nintendo's control of the system.
Well, and remember, because the way carts worked, you as a publisher had to buy your cartridges from Nintendo. Nintendo made
Yeah.
all their money up front
Mhm.
on essentially selling you those carts.
Yeah, and then they would also kind of limit the number of games you could publish per year, leading to some companies starting up like shell corporations or whatever. Like Konami had Ultra, so like Metal Gear came out and it was technically an Ultra Games release, and Acclaim had LJN, and so you would have these situations where they would, okay, we're going to put out even more cheap licensed garbage over here with the LJN name on it, and these hot Simpsons games that everyone loves.
Acclaim is known for quality. LJN is sort of our Dimension Films of Acclaim for the more, but although I'll defend Jaws the Revenge to the death. I really like Jaws the Revenge.
Yeah. And the Acclaim had, I'm trying to think, Wizards and Warriors was an Acclaim release. That was, I mean, Rare made that, but yeah, Wizards and Warriors was cool, and that technically had an Acclaim name on it.
LJN was so bad though. Those games. I mean, whether it was
like X-Men,
Nightmare on Elm Street,
Yep.
Friday the 13th,
Mm-hmm.
just all these cheap licenses. But I think you have to remember what this was in contrast to, though, which was Nintendo had an amazing run. I mean, if you just look at Super Mario Brothers, like those initial launch titles, which there were some gems, Excite Bike, Ice Climber, things like
Mhm.
that. But then look at Kid Icarus and Metroid came out at the same time. Legend of
Yep.
Zelda,
Mm-hmm.
which was, I mean, revolutionary with the save system. And did you beat Zelda? Did you have to tip line that, or did you do that?
I did it on my own. I had to call the tip line on the second, like the Master Quest or second
Yeah,
quest
second
or
quest was
whatever.
hard.
Like I remember calling them up and being like, "Where the fuck's the fifth dungeon?" And the dumb thing is, like, they wouldn't just come out and say it. They'd be like,
Yeah.
"Well, have you tried this?" It's like, motherfucker, I'm not. This isn't like the LucasArts Infinite Hints. I'm not over here with an invisible pen rubbing off the next thing. I called you to get the answer.
I
Anyway,
remember that. I remember that there's like vague cryptic clues. Like I was talking to an NPC where it's
Yeah.
like, look for the stones and in the wall where you can drop the bomb. And it was like, dude, and I don't remember because this was pre-internet. Maybe it was a video game magazine, but remember the negative warp zones and
Yeah.
like what a
Minus World.
mind fuck
Yeah.
that was?
Totally. Yeah, the Minus World, I spent dozens of hours probably trying to find a way out of the Minus World because no one knew that it was just a weird glitch. Like now
Yeah.
people, that have dumped these carts and really taken them apart and figured out like why they behave the way they do. And so now we know why the Minus World exists and why it happens, and how on the Japanese, like the Famicom disk system version, it happens completely differently because they're coded a little bit differently over there. And, the stuff exists in memory a little differently, I guess, technically. But, like that it was just a glitch and not something that was put in there deliberately. But I still, like, there was constantly just like, I bet if I do this, I can find this,
Yeah.
my way to the second Minus World. And so games just had such a mystery about them because yeah, you're right. The internet wasn't a thing. There was no like hive mind exchange of facts about a game. You couldn't, like you weren't having that many deep conversations with that many people about games. You had some friends here and there, and some of the guys that worked at my dad's tire shop. I fooled them saying like, "Oh yeah, you can jump over the flagpole," and they're like, "What?" And then they went home and tried it for hours. And I said, "Nah, I was just fucking with you." But actually, it turns out you super can in one spot in the game get over the flagpole.
Yeah, so you didn't have siblings because you didn't experience the joy of when you're playing the 2-player Mario Brothers and waiting your turn, telling your brother, if you fall down that hole there, you go to a secret level.
Yeah,
And then they would die, and then it was your turn.
exactly. That's a warp zone right there, baby.
Yeah, but this exploration kind of leads us to what the Game Genie did, where it was essentially using like poke commands and being able to alter, like being a filter between the ROM of the cartridge and the system, and essentially alter values in the game.
Yeah, and it worked a little bit differently, like nowadays through emulators and a lot of other stuff, like people are pretty familiar with cheat systems and how they work. But a lot of the stuff today is built on the model that it's a little more like the game Shark than the game Genie, and a little bit more like the Pro Action Replay and all that sort of stuff, because nowadays, a lot of the stuff is about freezing values in RAM, whereas the Game Genie was like modifying parts of ROM to be like, oh, when you do this, you get this many points instead of this many points, and or you start with this many lives because of, you know, whatever they were changing. And so it was like, it worked a little bit differently. That like nowadays the Game Genie is a little weird, but at the time it was the only game in town. And so, yeah, it was a really fascinating device. I really wanted to get my hands on one. I was big on codes and cheats and tips and weird stuff. And so the idea of like, hey, here's something, and if you enter this code, you can make Mario jump higher, or make him not jump as high, or hey, you can turn into, you know, just the number of weird things that you could do in a game. That was way more interesting to me than, you know, oh, let me have infinite lives or whatever. Like that stuff was fine, but it was really the like, let me make this game weird. Like that was the big draw there. So were you already covering games when the Game Genie came out? Like how did that all start for you?
So started writing for the Petaluma paper in August of 90, got a story in the Examiner, which we talked about in the teaser episode. In fact, I think I know what they saw was actually this article I wrote for the Examiner. And it was kind of a little beyond Nintendo, even though Nintendo's the artwork, really talking about how, okay, there's all these, you know, different systems out there. I like that they, instead of bonk, they put honk, the copy department that went through.
Good. Yeah.
But no, I was talking about like all these other things out there, and the Galoob Toys legal team at Howard Rice like saw this and contacted me and said, we're working, you know, do you know about the Game Genie? And what's funny is, what I actually knew about the Game Genie was from the publisher of the Examiner. When I met with them the first time I went in there, like showed it to me. He was like, oh yeah, one of my neighbors. So he might have also maybe said something to someone at Galoob. But I remember seeing it. I remember wanting one really bad. And there's nothing that makes a gamer want something more than knowing like you can't get this. I mean, dude, I spent so much of what little money I had in Japantown buying imports of like crappy games.
Yeah.
Just because it was like nobody else has this.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, I knew it. I wanted it. And when they hit me up about the trial, I was like, well, you know, I'd be back then, dude. I was talking to everyone. I would do radio appearances, TV appearances. I was going into game companies. I think, I hadn't really done any consulting yet at that point. And, you know, later we'll talk about it because I consulted for Sega's ad agency and PR agency that both lost the accounts subsequently, based on my feedback on their pitches. Yeah, like they brought me in and said, like, we are in this lawsuit against Nintendo for the Game Genie. Will you be an expert witness for Galoob and give like a gamer's perspective on things?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess like that was the thing, is it existed and was being sold in Canada for a brief period of time. And so it was like technically kind of out there. But you would read about it in magazines, but you knew you couldn't get one in the US because they had successfully filed an injunction. They started that lawsuit in 1990, and so that lawsuit, yeah, it started in 1990. Let me open up a couple of docs here and just look here. May and June of 1990, and Galoob filed a complaint against Nintendo at the end of May. Over that stuff. There's a quote here from David Galoob saying, "This blatant attempt to unfairly block the marketing of our new product, which will greatly enhance the enjoyment that tens of millions of American consumers derive from the use of their Nintendo Entertainment System, caused us to bring this action. By commencing this lawsuit, Galoob Toys is determined to vigorously oppose any anti-competitive initiatives by Nintendo to keep the Game Genie product from the market. We will not be intimidated by Nintendo and intend to respond to the strong retail support and market demand for the innovative Game Genie video game enhancer. We do not intend to change our plans for bringing Game Genie to market." So they were just like, you know, like, yeah, Nintendo was trying to stop it, and they're just like, nah, fuck it. We're gonna come at you and try to fight against this. It's interesting because, you know, this whole thing seems like such a nothing situation today when you think about it, and it just it really kind of illustrates how different this business was then, because Nintendo kind of was the only game in town. You know, so we're talking about 1990 here. So that means that the Sega Master System is out. That came out. They showed that at June CES in '86, and then it came out and did nothing. Tonka took over distribution in '87 of Tonka Truck's fame, and they kind of shit the bed on that stuff too. And then we've got the Genesis launch in '88 in Japan and mid '89 in the US. So this is like really late era NES. This is before, this is right around the time that the SNES is coming out in Japan, and not that long before it's going to come out in the US. And so it's really like the last days of the NES that Nintendo is trying to like figure out ways to prevent all of these upstarts and all these different little weird unauthorized things from coming out and kind of ruining their attempt at maintaining this weird iron grip on the business.
It's really strange too, because so for me, the beginning of the end of my love affair with Nintendo, and actually the reason why I ended up selling all those games used and kind of that experience led to me writing for the paper, was Marble Madness. I got Marble Madness for the NES, and I was like, this is awful. This is terrible.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I've been burned now too many times by bad games. And with Nintendo, I mean, Mario 3 was a really good game. Although I think the Wizard really, kind of like spoiled it for people, because we saw it in the movie that. But in conjunction with that, though, I'm speaking of the Wizard, like the Power Glove had come out, U-Force had come out. There were the shitty peripherals.
Yeah, and you were starting to see, even without Nintendo's, even with Nintendo's seal of quality, you were starting to see a lot of really terrible products. And a lot of those weird hardware products would have fit right in at the end of the 2600 era, where they had like, hey, here's an exercise bike that when you pedal, it pushes the fire button faster in asteroids, or, just like all this dumb shit that came out when the 2600 became such a big fad. Nintendo peripherals started resembling that stuff, and Sega got into some weird stuff by the end of the Genesis run too. But
Sega, but I mean, for every miracle piano teaching system, there were like a dozen bad peripherals for the NES.
Exactly.
And
it was
bad.
It was pretty rotten stuff. And so you're right. It definitely became much more of a minefield as more and more games started coming out. And so I'm with you. So the story I heard, because Marble Madness 2 was being developed for arcades, and then it got canceled. And in that version of the game, they at some point changed it from trackballs to joysticks. And I guess the reasoning was because of how successful that NES game was.
I hated that.
It was terrible. Oh my God. It was like the whole point was to spin the trackball. Like without that, like it's not even, it's absolutely pointless. That version of the game is terrible.
My biggest disappointment on the NES though was Skate or Die.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, because I love the computer game of that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, think about, dude, I think I had an Atari Lynx. I think you borrowed it and never gave it back.
That sounds right.
For California games.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
The half pipe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was the surfing that was really amazing on the Lynx, but that Commodore 64 version of California Games is an incredible video game.
Yeah.
And that NES version, like Konami got the rights to it somehow, and just it was a totally different game, not nearly as good. And then they went out and made sequels that were like outside of the weird original canon of Skate or Die, where Konami was suddenly putting out like Skate or Die 2 Bad and Rad, and like Ski or Die, and all this other stuff. And so I always think when I think about the late era NES, I think about those G.I. Joe games that came out super late. And I remember like being, I was like, oh man, that'd be really cool. G.I. Joe, finally a good G.I. Joe video game. And I just was so done with the NES by that point that like I could not tell you if those games are good or not, because I just don't remember. It was like that, and like the weird interminable coverage of Golgo 13 in Nintendo Power because of how many fucked up mazes that game had. Like it deserved it because that game was inscrutable and awesome. Also, it had there's some awesome parts of that game, but like, man, there was a lot of bullshit happening on that platform. For like every Cobra triangle, you would end up with, like 5 games that were like just pretty whack. I don't know.
But just imagine if you could have your mind wiped and you could go back for the first time and play Golgo 13, Metal Gear, and Bionic Commando.
Yep. Yeah. Like those
were insane.
Yeah.
Those were such good games. And I think, so maybe part of it too, because I'm thinking about this. Okay, so on one hand, on the journalist front, And on the game front, we were talking about this off the air. Like you and
Yeah.
I were in the right age that as we turned 13 and 14, we were aging out of the Nintendo demographic. We were going to arcades. Like I remember playing Sly Spy and things like that. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh man, like I wish I could play something like this at home. And the Genesis with Altered Beast had that. TurboGrafx had that. Not deep games. They didn't. I mean, and we'll talk about this more in the Sega episode. But it was kind of like short-term cheap pop thrills.
Yeah.
But I think that also in the industry, like people are always talking about what's next, what's next, what's next.
Mhm.
And Nintendo probably waited a year too late to come out with the SNES to like time it perfectly and stick the landing. But yeah, I think the older gamers were getting just bored.
Yeah, I was definitely looking for something else. And so that was like, by the time Super Mario 3 came out, I was pretty, like I'd gone back to computer games. Like I got a Commodore 64 by that point. And so like I was playing a lot of stuff over there, a lot of deeper, longer, richer games over there. I mean, graphically not as good, but you know. And then I had a Genesis also. And so the early days, like I got a Genesis very early, and the early days of the Genesis were dire looking back on it now, but at the time it didn't really always feel that way. But it was a lot of arcade ports where it's like, man, Golden Axe, that's an incredible video game. And then you buy it and bring it home and you finish it in an hour and a half. And you're like, man, I got to go out and rob somebody to buy another video game now.
Go back to Klaus and get your money back.
Oh, fuck Klaus, man, that motherfucker.
Tell people to cheese the Klaus story. I'm sure Klaus will come up more in our segment.
So Klaus's hobbies was in Cotati, California. And when I was 16, actually, no, this is before I was 16, because my dad would drive me and my friend Wes there. And we would go and we would, actually, Wes had his license before I did. So Wes would go. Anyway, and we would go, and Klaus was running a game rental place first and foremost. Like he just had a bunch of games and he would rent them out. But we would go there and we heard that you could trade with him, and you could just, and we were like, okay, well, we're done with these games. We should trade these games for, and you would just sit there and haggle with Klaus for like 3 hours, like bring in a box of fucking Nintendo games and just go like, I'll give you, and you're just like, you know, you're an idiot kid on top of that. And Klaus is just sitting there. Klaus is a very large man. I don't necessarily say that to shame him, but more of just like, so you can kind of set the stage of him sitting on a stool, just kind of sitting back on, I don't know, yeah. And making that noise a lot at your trades. And to the point where you were suddenly giving him 6 games and $10 for one game, or especially like when we were trying to trade up from NES games to Genesis games and weird stuff like that. Like I decimated my 8 and 16-bit collections by giving most of those games to Klaus and all that sort of stuff. And it's fine. I got to play a much wider variety of games that way. And that was a lot of fun. So I don't necessarily regret it from that standpoint, but like I used to have a whole hell of a lot of games, and then I traded them down from, 100 games to 30 or something stupid like that. And
there's so much stuff.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff that we got rid of, just not thinking that it would ever have any long-term value.
No, definitely not. And I ended up like the stuff that mattered to me, or, like I kind of stumbled into a lot of old games over the years. And so I got back most of the stuff that I truly care about. But yeah, without Klaus, I would not have stumbled into weird fighting games like Fighting Masters for the Genesis, or, it was just some of the weird, insane stuff that was out there. And so yes, Klaus was, I was gonna say Klaus is a ripoff artist, but whatever. Klaus was a legitimate businessman running a rental business. We just happened to walk in there and say like, please rip us off, and he was more than happy to do so.
I mean, I remember like the Super Famicom. The first time I played that was at the EGM, had like this really sad booth at CES. The first one I went to, like January '91. And Nintendo didn't show the SNES on the floor. They had it behind closed doors, but I wasn't in enough then.
Right.
I wasn't even invited to the party with Kenny Loggins playing that CES. And Tom Saris was doing PR for them then. But he did get me an interview with Howard Phillips, who at the time you could tell like this dude is at the end of his rope as the game master. And we'll talk about at GameSpot, the great story about like just jaded, burnt out, like Howard Phillips writing that Mario 64 review for us in '96. But yeah, I remember interviewing Howard Phillips, and I was just kind of like, this dude is just at the end of it. He's ready to hang up his bow tie and get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember like a store in the Sunset in San Francisco selling like a Super Famicom for like $1,000 imported, and they had a Game Genie. They had one
Oh,
like
wow.
from Canada.
Yeah.
And I remember before I did the trial, I got mine when I did the trial, but I remember like almost spending $100 to buy one, but I was like, I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so let's get into the trial a little bit here.
Yeah.
And so again, that lawsuit started up in 1990. The first verdict hit in June 91. Nintendo lost that initial verdict and decided to appeal. When did you get involved in this? Was it all the way in 1990? Were you part of that first verdict, or did you come in on the kind of retrial, the appeal?
See, I'm trying to think about this because I was thinking about this. We were talking about when that court sketch was done. I looked at Justia, and anyone can just look at them. You just search my name and the Nintendo of America and the date on the ruling. Oh, what's this trying to get me to open? Microsoft Edge to look at a PDF.
Yep.
The date on the ruling is July 12th, 1991. So I would have had to have come in early 91. I think the trial was heard spring of 91. So it was probably not long after I wrote that article for the Examiner, December of 90,
Okay.
that I got the call and spent. I was trying to recollect this the other night. So, and I've been pretty open about this. Like at the time, it seemed like all the money in the world, and it's definitely not bad. I was paid $20 an hour as an expert witness to do this, and again, great money. Hell, great money now. I'll work for $20 an hour, depending on what the task is. But when you're 15 years old, it's again all the money in the world.
Right.
But you learned later, much like many things, how our naivete in youth we were taken advantage of, because apparently expert witnesses make like 10 times that typically.
Yeah.
And I think I put in about 250 hours. I think I got about $5,000 for all the time. Like I would ride with my mom into work. She would drop me off down at Justin Herman Plaza. I would go to the law firm. They gave me a Game Genie to take home, get familiar with it, play it. And as an expert witness, like they spent so much time with prep because, oh my God, was I just such an egotistical shit like about this trial. And I remember making the argument to the lawyers where I was like, well, there's the negative zones in Mario. Because one of the things Nintendo was saying was like, this is going to break your game and have unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's the negative zones in Mario. And then in Metroid, if you go on the wall and you do the wall walking, you can find all sorts of hidden areas in the game. And for me, like, I loved that, but they were like, a judge will never understand that.
Right.
Like, you need to just like really, let's boil this down. Does it make games more fun or less fun? What do people like about games? How would you use the Game Genie? Would you feel like this was extending the life of your Nintendo games? Like, they essentially spent 250 hours, like just kind of like getting me to shut up, and
Like
just
getting you on
concise
message.
answers.
Like that's
Yeah.
it's so crazy to think about, because like hearing that out loud now, you go like, oh, wait a minute. They like went to a newspaper columnist and grilled and drilled the talking points into him. That sounds really crazy, but like, like, you're 15, like whatever. Yeah, it's so nuts that but you had credibility, right? I mean, that's probably why, because they could have gone out and found any kid and been like, hey, we're going to teach you how to talk Game Genie and put you in front of this because we're just the expert witness as a gamer or whatever. But like, you probably came with a little bit of extra credibility being a newspaper columnist, even being 15.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they had like a pretty good logic for why it would be more effective to do it this way. And I know that I think they had like Don Nowert from Video Games and Computer Entertainment, like was one of the other witnesses, as someone that was like a professional. But I think that to your point, I think they wanted the credibility, but they wanted me to testify like I was just a regular kid. They didn't want me to talk about like, well, my line of work and I see this, like
Exactly.
They didn't want that at all out of me. And in fact, I remember in prep, there was a disastrous prep session where they had to talk to my mom, and they were like, okay, he needs to tone down this know-it-all shit. And like, he's
and your mom was probably like, yeah, no shit.
Yeah, I've been hearing that his entire life. But I remember like there was a disastrous prep where they were very concerned about even putting me on the stand based on like me coming across as too cocky. So I think that it really like, and the way they would do it, and this was smart, is they would do like this bad cop routine where it wasn't them, where they were like, well, the judge is really not going to go for this, and the judge is going to want you to do very concise answers, and you need to watch what you say, because if you say this, cross-examination might open it up, And under Cross, you might get hit with all these things. And it's funny because Howard Phillips testified for Nintendo, and they had some other experts, and they had some focus group data. But when I was up on the stand, like what I was there really to talk about was like, okay, is this going to extend the life of games? How am I going to feel if I enter a code and it freezes my game? Am I going to like hold Nintendo responsible or think Game Genie broke my system? Like,
Yeah, like that was their whole lawsuit seemed to hinge on the idea of like, you're gonna have a bad experience with the game if you enter these codes. There's gonna have unintended effects. It's gonna break the game. It's gonna do this. And I think, yeah, to your point, like, yeah, there were bugs in a lot of their games that people knew about even then, between the Minus World and the Waldorf stuff in Metroid, and those are good examples. But there was just a lot of stuff like that. And then there's another video which we don't necessarily have to get into here, but that ended up being part of the trial that was like, basically, I suspect Galoob's lawyers put it together. That was like, well, you know, if you use the turbo function on Nintendo's own controller, the advantage on games like Legend of Zelda, where pushing start goes to a subscreen, it just makes the screen go up and down over and over again. So their own weird game modifying technology sometimes has unintended effects that make the game worse. And like that seems like a very salient point, given that Nintendo was trying to leverage this whole thing of like unintended consequences. Like, it wasn't necessarily about like, oh, you're making it without our seal of approval. It was like they were trying to hang their hat on this idea of like, oh, it's gonna break games and that's gonna be bad, and it's gonna make us look bad, where our brand is gonna suffer because people will associate these weird effects with Nintendo, which just seemed like utter nonsense. But
well, and it's crazy too, because Howard Lincoln, very high up at Nintendo, also a lawyer. Like in Game Over, there's the famous story about Donkey Kong and Universal trying to sue Nintendo, but saying it's too similar to King Kong.
Yeah.
And then Howard Lincoln going into a heated legal meeting with Universal and saying like, okay, where's your proof that you own the rights to King Kong?
Right.
You know, I mean, like Nintendo had some very sharp legal minds, but it seemed like, I don't know, maybe like you said earlier about the rental stuff, like they did have some flex on, okay, if you're reproducing documents, that's an illegal act. But it does feel like this was a reactionary lawsuit about trying to have, like, I think they thought this was going to be the first chip to fall, or the first domino to fall before Tengen and Comerica could like publish like Dizzy games for
right. Yeah.
yes.
Exactly. Yeah. This probably seemed like all to them the same thing of like, oh, we want to keep a control. We want to get a cut. Really, at the end of the day, we want to make money off of every cartridge sold. And if you're out there making your own cartridges, that's bad for us. So,
but Galoob would have paid that. Galoob was fine with paying a license fee. I mean, they tried to get this
Right.
through. I think that, yeah, I think the idea just really freaked Nintendo out, that it was like, okay, we're now literally going to have a peripheral that sits between the cartridge and the consumer.
yeah. And I wonder how much of that was like, oh, well, they're going to put out, you know, codes that let them people finish our games even faster, and that's bad. Like, I wonder if there was any like consideration there, or if it really was just
that was part of it. I think that's in one of the news clips we're going to we have. I think, I'm not sure if it's the one.
Yeah, it's the one I have. Like when Nintendo's rep in that clip does mention it, but it didn't seem like a particularly like major point.
They went to court about that though. They had like Nintendo game counselors there. They're like, I hear from people all the time about games and they like the challenge, you know, and I don't give them the answers. I give them cryptic clues. Like
right. Yeah.
I'm going to send them on a side quest to figure out the riddle of how you pass this on Zelda on the second quest.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Oh God, when we talk about our radio show on the Christian radio station, remember when we on the air, like we were Howard Stern, like would crank call the Nintendo gameplay counselors on the air?
Yeah, we tried that a couple of times. It just, I always felt terrible about that. I don't think it was ever actually funny. Like, it was just it never worked out.
You would try and segue it into a story about how you had no friends.
Well, so that was the thing, is like I think we knew by then that like Nintendo was paid to keep, like, as long as you were not abusive to them, they would stay on the phone with you for as long as you wanted. And that was probably why they eventually went to a 900 number, because they're like, kids are just calling in just randomly. And I did this once, just calling in to be like, hey, what's up? Like, I called in to be like, I actually called in to be like, hey, did you know if you write in Zelda in the name field that it starts you with a second quest? Did you know that? I just found that out. And they were like, really? Wow. I wonder what that's all about. And, of course, they're trying to like spin it back into like whatever fucking, oh, that's a mysterious thing, like whatever. And yeah, but yeah, sometimes a couple times I called up with stuff like that and they would stay on the phone, and it was all, I was a kid, so I didn't know how to get off phone calls. Adults were the ones that ended phone calls. And so it was just like, all right, I'm gonna go, I guess. Thanks. And yeah, it was awkward. The game counselor thing was always awkward. Sega's was, 100 USA Sega was a little more to the point on that front, but it was always weird.
To show the court sketch.
Yeah. And so yes, so you went and talked in court about the Game Genie after hours and hours of coaching and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, you have a sketch of that. Is that?
Yeah, there is. Let me see if I can get this. Oh, there we go. So this was a TV news story had this, and we were trying to figure this out off the air. Like, did a court sketch artist actually do this, or did the TV station commission this for the story?
Yeah, I wonder if maybe there were just like were there no cameras allowed in the courtroom, so they didn't have the footage, and
Look at that likeness. They really made a point to get the chin sag.
It's not, yeah, like so we'll watch this video clip from October of 91 here now, which I have to say, not to set it up too much, features an iconic Glenn sweatshirt that when I saw this, I was like, oh yeah, no, I feel like Glenn was wearing that sweatshirt every day from 1990 to 1993.
Okay, put your clip on then we'll show mine, which is somehow worse.
Okay. And we'll just air this clip in its entirety and then come back and talk about it.
17 minutes after the hour, it's the toy Nintendo didn't want you to be able to buy, but it's headed to the market anyway. In Seattle, Cairo TV consumer reporter Herb Weisbaum has the story of a video gizmo that lets you do some amazing things with your old Nintendo system. Good morning, Herb.
Good morning, Paula. Just getting a little early morning video game workout here. It is called the Game Genie, and if the folks at Nintendo here in Seattle had their way, you wouldn't be able to get it. In fact, they kept the Game Genie bottled up for more than a year while it worked its way through the courts whether they decided whether it could come to market. Well, Nintendo lost its lawsuit this summer, and that made video game people very, very happy.
Stop on a...
Choices, choices.
Ooh, an Infinity machine gun bullet.
That's what you get with the Game Genie. Choices. This little device, which piggybacks onto a game cartridge, lets you customize your 8-bit Nintendo video games.
It works.
With the Game Genie accessory, you can temporarily change the rules of a game, change what happens on the screen. The Genie gives you 3 wishes. By punching in various codes, you get 3 ways to modify each game.
You can't totally go in there and totally revamp the game and change it, but you can make it a bit easier.
Glenn Rubenstein is a high school sophomore who plays video games and reviews them for the San Francisco Examiner. He thinks Game Genie is great.
You could start on a different level, you could give yourself more lives, you could make the game harder if you wanted to. Essentially, it gives you something new to do with your old games.
But Nintendo doesn't want you doing new things with its games. Part of what makes a game fun, the company says, is the challenge.
And if I can use the Game Genie and possibly finish a game in 20 minutes as opposed to several weeks, I don't really feel like I've accomplished anything.
Last year, Nintendo went to court and blocked the sale of Game Genie in the United States. Galoob Toys, which makes the device, fought back, convincing a federal judge that players do have the right to modify their video games, as long as the original copyrighted game program isn't permanently changed.
Just like the consumer can change how the sound is on a record on his stereo or his CD, can change the color on his color television set, modify how that looks, so too can the consumer change how his video game plays on a temporary basis.
You have the really experienced players who may find their games too easy, so they want to make them harder, or you have the less experienced players who want to make the game less challenging so they can, fully enjoy the game.
They threw it back. That's radical firepower. I didn't go to any of them.
Game Genie is just being rolled out nationwide, and even at $50 a pop, toy stores are struggling to keep up with demand.
A lot of requests for it. A lot of requests.
The sign at this Toys R Us tells the story. There's more on the way. Check back with us soon. Store manager Greg Armada knows a hit when he sees one.
It's as popular as any of the hot video titles we saw last Christmas. Just as hot as any game.
And for good reason. 30 million American homes have the Nintendo 8-bit system. The Game Genie may breathe new life into these old units, now that they're being upstaged by the technically superior 16-bit system.
Nintendo is appealing the judge's ruling, but the Genie's out of the bottle. It's on the market, and some industry analysts are predicting it's going to be one of the hottest sellers this Christmas holiday season. Paula?
Now, at $50 a crack, what kind of deal is that? How does that compare to Nintendo, and what else is out there on the market?
It's in the basic price range for what you pay for a good video game these days, so it's no more expensive really than what you buy a game for, and this plays with all the games.
So if you were to look at this through the Nintendo point of view, this isn't so hot, but if you weren't to look through their glasses, it looks like a pretty good deal, a lot of fun. Any downsides to the game?
About the only one is that if you have a problem playing a game with the Genie hooked up and you call the Nintendo hotline, they have a hotline where you can call in and ask questions. They can't help you because they're not supporting this product. That's about it.
So for folks that are into Nintendo, can you play this thing on the 16-bit NES system?
No, this only works with the old 8-bit system. It doesn't work with the brand new super-duper 16-bit system that's just hit the market. And Paula, you may be looking at this going, I'll never have this in my house. Your daughter's going to be asking you for one of these things when she gets a little bit older because yeah, really.
And you said they're going to direct these, they're actually going to market these specific games for girls.
Yeah, most of the game players right now are little boys, about 70% of the market, but they're now moving into girl games. They're working on a Barbie game, Nintendo is. So yeah, you're going to be spending some money on this.
Oh, I can hardly wait. Hooray. Have a good day.
All right, so there you have it. That's a few things of note there. One, the sweatshirt. Also, on that desk is that Amiga 500 that I'm pretty sure I ended up with all of your Amiga 500s at some point.
I like. We'll get into this, and I'm sure as we air out old grievances, I will say there were a lot of things that were some that were given, some that were loaned.
I bought that Amiga off you and it was broken, so you gave me another one that was broken in a different way, and then
right.
and then you gave me a third one that actually worked. I think is
how did I have 5? What did Commodore?
Commodore,
that much?
Yeah, like you had that. I still have that CDTV that they sent you and all that sort of stuff. So yes. Yes, there was a while there that Commodore, I think, was just dumping stuff on people, hoping that anyone would write about it. And I ended up with a lot of that stuff. And I made that jump around mod on that Amiga.
That's right.
So
there you go.
Yeah,
there's a documentary out there about the mod music scene. I believe the tracker.
Yeah, all the tracker stuff. Yeah,
I gotta watch that.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of crazy stuff coming out of there. But yeah, so the thing that struck me about that is like your answers are precise in a way that it feels like that again, like, like you went through a lot of hours of coaching, for the stand. And that part is not necessarily represented in the story, that also like you were part of a lawsuit, but like a lot of this footage, of like kid plays with Game Genie, like all this B-roll and stuff just feels like Galoob handed CBS this full-on package. And then all CBS did is go talk to the one guy at Nintendo with his mullet who just went like, yeah, it's bad. And yeah.
Well, if you thought that was polished, download this drive. This drive link I just put, because I can't share it on my end because I don't think it'll share the audio.
Yeah.
But this is, so Kron and Richard Hart, God bless him, one of the early founders of CNET, I believe, back when he was doing The Next Step.
Right. Yes, you did the CNET TV show or something. Yeah. Something like that.
They did so many stories on me. They had file footage that was like in this story. This was where the court sketch came from. But this is a little polished. And when you hear me talk, I just want you to imagine that, there was a note that I got, which was like, okay, Glenn, here's the thing. We like how Corey Haim speaks, but he's a little too butch. So if you could just sort of affect that a little bit more, I think you'll be golden, kid.
Wow. Okay. All right. This might be a little clunky in the edit when I drop this video in, but I will. Yes. Okay. I'm going to do this and
17 minutes after.
Then cut back to us. So it starts over and then here it is.
The outcome of a billion-dollar court judgment against Nintendo may well depend on the testimony of an expert witness who is 15 years old. Richard Hart reports on the next step for a video game authority who is still in high school.
It's 16-bit. It has a strong lineup of games. And it comes with Sonic the Hedgehog, which I feel is like one of the greatest games ever made.
Glenn Rubenstein is the nation's foremost expert on video games. He's only 15 years old.
Oh, I love it all. I'm a member of the multi-media generation.
If you're an adult with questions about what your kids are up to or what they want to be up to, here's a chance to get some straight answers from a guy who really knows.
In addition to appearing on the radio, 6 television stations, 3 newspaper columns, a magazine, and consulting for 3 major corporations, Glenn Rubenstein recently made his first appearance live in federal court.
All I knew about court was LA law. I mean, my whole life, that's what I grew up on. I went to actual court, a totally different experience, but I loved it nonetheless.
Glenn testified about the next step in video games, the game Genie, manufactured by the Galoob Corporation. It lets you plug in any Nintendo game cartridge and cheat at the game. Nintendo sued to stop Galoob from selling it. Galoob asked Rubenstein to appear as an expert witness at the age of 14. His testimony persuaded federal judge Fern Smith to rule against Nintendo, the biggest game manufacturer in the world. Already, the first Game Genie clones have begun to appear in stores.
Well? Yes, this is Glenn Rubenstein.
Today, he gets calls from around the world asking for his views on games and kids.
Thanks. Bye.
In between it all, he's president of his sophomore class, on the wrestling team, drama club, still writing the syndicated column, and studying Japanese.
Especially in my job. You know, it's like, I think, Japanese should be taught in all schools because that's the language of the future, because that's who all our correspondents are with now. My mom pretty much handles most public relations like faxing, and taking care of stuff like that. But really, so far, word of mouth in the industry has gotten me where I am.
Where he is on top of the world, hoping he won't crash in his first professional life. In Petaluma, Richard Hart, News Center 4.
You think of Petaluma as a small town. There's a lot going on.
For Glenn's coming up, the California Raisins have finally got...
Okay, yeah. So just you laying on the bed, flipping through some magazines, at the arcade, playing some Time Traveler.
I'm gonna have to start therapy again after doing this podcast.
Was it the shaved up the back part that caused it? Because that made me want to go into therapy.
Here's the thing, dude. Like, I look at photos of both of us. Okay, first off, this controversial take for someone to say is, I don't think people were mean enough to me as a child because too much misguided self-esteem in the wrong areas.
I think that's maybe why, like, you said it last episode, but that you had a very punchable kind of thing going on. I remember occasionally being like, man, this friend of mine, sometimes he's a real fucking dick. I don't know, whatever. All right.
I just look at this and I'm just like nobody was like, okay, dude, look, we can undo the hair thing. Like, why'd you dye your hair? We can undo this.
That'll fix itself. It's fine.
Yeah. Like eat a vegetable, lose some weight, go for a walk, touch grass. Like,
well, I remember when I'm trying to think, like it wasn't that long after you and I met that I feel like you were trying to go vegan, was it? I mean,
no, I was vegetarian. I gave up red meat in 94. I went vegetarian in 95, and then I went vegan in 2002.
Okay.
So, but still, dude, I mean, like, I just lost a bunch of weight, but I was like at 285 as a vegan. So, like, that didn't.
Yeah, it's not like it's.
Yeah, it depends on what you're eating. But
there was a lot of trips to Fresh Choice, and it was like there was just a lot of like, well, technically this is all salad, and like, a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, but no, I look at that now, and I think that, if I get access to time travel at any point in my life, like, I feel like I can really narrow it down. I can come up with like 3 fixes to just really like put everything on the right track. But I watch that stuff and I'm just like, good Lord. But it's funny because you and I was thinking about this the other day because, dude, this whole thing is like just unlocked so much.
Yeah.
And it's weird to revisit it because, we think about the Cliff Notes and the good stuff that we tell everyone. But I think about like when you and I met, I think that both as teenagers, we both had like these weird self-esteem issues. And for me, it was like this intense need to be liked by everyone. And for you, it was like almost you wanted to push people away or offend them. Like, so we both coped with it in complete opposite ways.
I don't think I came into that until we started rapping.
Really?
Well, no, the public access. Yeah, I don't think I came into that until like, but yeah, there was definitely once I started doing anything that was performative in nature, it was a lot of just like, no, fuck this, fuck you. Like, I'm going to do, like very much like, yeah. It was, I don't know why that was because I had always been like a really pretty shy, and I still am, like I still, I still have a lot of weird self-esteem issues, that stuff's totally unresolved. And it just manifests in different ways now than it did then. But yeah, there was definitely, there was something, and I don't know what it was that drove me to actually start putting myself out there. It wasn't until I was like 15-ish or something like that and took that drama class. I don't know why I took that drama class. Like, I didn't need to for like elective credits or whatever. It was something like that I wanted to do. And like looking back on it now, it just felt really out of character in a weird way with everything I had done up to that point. Like I played sax, like I was in the band, and you're on stage with like 50 kids, and like, who cares? But like, yeah, I don't know. There was just something in there that I was mad about and wanted to get out. And yeah, I don't really know what it was that caused that. But I think when we started rapping, it really, like, that was just like, whatever my sense of humor was, came out in a very abrasive way. And when people gave feedback on it, it was like, okay, yeah, this is a good time for me to do something more abrasive.
Well, so when doing my archive research, I need to share this
Mhm.
because did not know you were in the computer club and in the paper here.
Oh yeah,
1988.
yep,
Yeah. There's a young Jeff Gerstmann. And then I don't know how I didn't know. I found this, Jeff, not to ambush you with this, but I had never seen this before. Did your mom like convince you to do this?
Wow, fuck,
From
right?
a Press Democrat, like this was right before we met. Why didn't you mention that you had some journalism experience?
I don't know how so this would have been right before we met.
Yeah.
So like 90, this is weird because I wasn't collecting baseball cards at this point. Like, my dad started buying baseball. Like, I was kind of falling out of it at this point by a large, like I had a lot of baseball cards in the, let's call it like 87, 86, 88, 85. Like I had a lot of baseball cards from that era. And then like 1992, 1993, my dad got into it, and we started collecting baseball cards. I have no fucking idea how that came about.
Yeah. It was like in the teen section of the Press Democrat.
I wonder if it was a situation where like we were writing things for school, and then the school pitched them to like, oh, we've got the teen section to run some of the best articles. And I just like wrote some bullshit. Man, fuck. Now that I've seen that, I'm like, yeah, I guess I do kind of remember that, but I have no idea why or how. But I bet it was something where like we were writing something in school as part of like whatever the newspaper, in junior high, or I guess this would have been, yeah, what the fuck would that have been?
Yeah, you were junior. You were a junior in high school.
What the fuck would that have been?
I don't know, dude. That's why I thought my theory was that because your mom was aware of me and had mentioned me to you, that your mom would have said like, why don't you write about something for the paper?
No.
And this was the result. That was my
Yeah, no, because I never, like, I would not have had the self-confidence to make that cold call or to do any of that stuff. Again, I still don't. But yeah, so like, I think that it had to have been something through school. It had to have been something where like we were writing articles for school, and then some of them got submitted, and then the paper agreed to run some of them. It has to be. I don't know. That's bizarre.
I was shocked to come across this today when I was just trying to find some stuff online.
Yeah,
Very shocked.
That's real, man. What the hell?
No, I know. And I like, and had I known about this, I think maybe it would have changed some things.
I wonder. I don't know.
Yeah, you could have stolen
That's right.
McDonald's job from the Healdsburg.
I know. Yeah, if I had known what Healdsburg was, still no one knows what Healdsburg truly is.
But I think it's revisiting a lot of this. So with the trial, I mean, so let's not bury the lead here. Like, Gloop won this. This is, I didn't know this till I was reading this today. I was reading an article covering the trial. This was the first time Nintendo ever lost a court case.
Yeah.
was this. And man, Jeff, why was I such an asshole? Why was my ego out of control at this time? I mean, like, so look at this. This is the judge's initial finding that she released, finding for Galoob Toys. And boom, right there.
Go ahead and read it out.
Yes, Galoob's evidence on sales was persuasive. In addition to the survey data, Galoob proffered expert testimony from Glenn Rubenstein, a member of Nintendo's target market, males ages 8 to 14. He has been a serious player of video games for several years and spends as many as 30 hours per week with this avocation. He has written numerous magazine and newspaper articles critiquing various video games, including Nintendo's. Rubenstein's opinion is that the Game Genie would encourage rather than discourage enthusiasm over video games in general, because it allows players to explore new ways of playing a game, thereby making the game more accessible to players of differing abilities. This would likely increase the use of a video game in a multiplayer family, providing more value per consumer dollar. Here's the line. Oh, this just launched so much arrogance. The court found his testimony more convincing than that of Nintendo's employees and experts.
Yeah. So it's your fault that Nintendo lost that court case.
Yes.
And and that the Game Genie was allowed to prosper. Yeah, they still sent you a Super Nintendo. So
I remember, and this was before I met you, because it was weird too. I think when I met you, you know what's funny is you wanted to talk about games a lot. Like, you actually didn't really ask about borrowing anything early on, and we would just hang out, and you weren't even like, oh, let's bring your stuff from us. I remember when the Super Nintendo came out, I remember like through the local modem scene, like hanging out with some guys, and they wanted like, oh, why don't you come spend the night? Oh, and bring the Super Nintendo over, and hey, can you leave that here for the week? Because we want to show some other friends. And that's when I was just like, man, fuck everybody. Like, everybody's just out to get something from me. You know?
Yeah. Everybody wants something, as they say.
Yes. But you remember like some of my brother's friends breaking into my house and like stealing like a Genesis.
Well, you left your front door unlocked like all the time.
That has changed.
Yeah, I would hope so. But like in that era, the front door of your place, because I remember like when you stopped going to school and really dedicating yourself to independent study and and editing. Really dedicating yourself. Like I would wake up and roll over there about 10:30 and just walk in the front door. You'd still be asleep and I'd be like, all right, get up, let's go get something to eat, and then the day would begin. But yeah, this Game Genie verdict, and like in May of '92 was when the final verdict went down, and yeah, we were not hanging out quite. Well, I mean, when that final verdict hit, we were. Yeah, we were by then. Yeah,
dude, I remember like, so we're gonna have to touch on the public access stuff because that's really dates when the journey began. But there was one thing before I met you though. So we were doing a high school production of Annie, like in spring of '91, and I guess this is when the trial was happening. I remember one day at rehearsal, and I thought people were fucking with me, like I wasn't there, and someone was like, yeah, there was this dude here looking for you and like asking all these questions about you, and I never confirmed it, but it seemed like, based on what I found out, that like Nintendo would like sent some PI to like go to my high school and try and get some dirt on me.
Yeah, it's a really
weird.
Yeah, and that's not obviously years later and a different legal team and all that other stuff, but I know when they had various hacks and people coming up with custom firmware for Nintendo platforms and stuff, like they definitely hired people to shadow people. It's not out of the realm of possibility for Nintendo to do that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's the only thing I can think of. Like, it was just very strange. Like, and I remember like having a tense elevator ride like with Nintendo's legal team. Cross-examination, I don't have a lot of memory of. I wish I did. But yeah, like the whole experience was just weird. But so the epilogue to this story though actually does involve you quite a bit, because remember that because I was cited in this and Galoob was on the verge of bankruptcy, and I think Nintendo had to pay them like $15 million in damages or something like that for lost sales. Like, it was really insane. And they based those lost sales number, I think, on the amount that the NES Advantage had done in sales. Like,
interesting.
It was calculated based on that. So do you remember Galoob would basically pay me $20 an hour to just like do anything, like to just come down and hang out at their offices for an afternoon, like go to malls for focus group stuff, and then
Yeah.
later go to CES to like do booth demos of the Game Genie for Genesis, which is what I think took care of the hotel and my airfare for the first CES we went to in June of '92.
Yeah, that does sound familiar now that you mention it. Yeah, that was the Galoop stuff. I remember it happening, but I don't remember it being like a major part of your life at the time. Like I don't remember it coming up all that often because it was kind
sunsetting a
of
little bit.
it was near the end of it for sure. But yeah, I remember you still had some kind of occasional duties or whatever that you were doing with them at the time. Yeah. Huh.
So, but the overlap though on this, okay, so we have to try to think, is there anything else on Game Genie that we didn't cover necessarily? Aside from the fact that, you know what's funny is aside from the trial, and aside from work for Gloob, I've never picked up a Game Genie ever and said like, I want to modify my video game. That just never actually happened.
Yeah, no, I had a Genesis Game Genie. I had a Game Boy Game Genie, which was insane because it plugged into the stupid top and then had a little slot on the back for this tiny little code book because you had to bring the stupid codes with you. It was like this insane solution. I messed with that stuff. Were you intimidated at all with the idea of like you are going to court against Nintendo, the company that was kind of all of video games? Was there any part of you that was just like, but I like video games? Or
well, you know, all I knew about court at the time was LA Law and being in the real experience. Yeah. Okay. So, and I've never talked about this before. When I started writing about video games, and I think like you can relate to this, like I had a fire underneath me for like the first month where it was like, I'm going to stick it to Nintendo, man. Like I'm going to write about their unfair
here's what's
trade
really going
practices.
on.
Yeah. And, you know, and talk about like all the dumb stuff they're doing. And then I started talking to Tom Saris and the people on Nintendo, and I was like, they're really nice. Like they sent me Dr. Mario, like, and Andy Eddy also did a little bit of like mentoring where he's like, well, you should, you know, be a little fair and try and give equal coverage to things. And I think like I worked that out. My system's really quick, but no, going up against them in court, I think Nintendo's PR was so bad at the time that it was, and remember there was no Super Nintendo yet. So
yeah,
I think all I'd gotten out of Nintendo at that point was, and remember Nintendo didn't do junkets back then. Sega really kickstarted the junket craze, and Nintendo started doing them in response. In fact, Nintendo got a lot more. Notice how WWE now like gives interviews to Fightful and stuff. That didn't happen before AEW.
Right. Yeah.
So back then, I didn't feel like I really had anything to lose from Nintendo. I was like, well,
yeah,
Super Nintendo, they don't. Like that
was always the thing, you know, like years later, you know, people are like, oh, this company's going to cut you off if you say bad things about their games. Like, who cares? There's like 80 companies and this company puts out 2 games a year. You know, it was always Rockstar. People were like, oh, if you say bad things about Grand Theft Auto, it's like, I don't give a shit. There's going to be
I will
7
call Geronimo and just be like, dude, come on. We went and got hot dogs that day when you worked at Crystal Dynamics.
Right. Yeah.
Hook me up.
But yeah, there's like, you know, it'd be 7 years before they put out another game. So like, whatever, at the end of the day, who cares? Nintendo put out a little bit more than that, but like at the same time, that stuff never really mattered that
because
much.
Of lead times, because I was a newspaper journalist.
Right.
The only time I ever got an advance copy of a Nintendo game, like that I didn't get retail when I got ROMs, was when I covered Super Mario All-Stars for GamePro. That was the only time I ever got an advanced Nintendo game. And it wasn't from Nintendo, it was from GamePro.
Right.
Through Nintendo.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it was really weird. But I have to say, like, in hindsight, and we'll talk later on me, because I definitely stepped in it big time in '94 of saying something I should not have said about Nintendo in an article, or said about my behavior at a Nintendo press junket in an article. But Nintendo was always very forgiving and like shockingly
even
nice
from
to me
that,
in spite of it.
even which yes, I do definitely want. I remember that shit.
Yeah,
that shit I remember.
But when I called their PR people when I was doing that short-lived game show at Twit, and I was like, hey, can I get a 3DS? You know, like they were still sending me stuff, you know?
Yeah.
They've always been very, very nice. So yeah, they didn't hold it against me. And I think, although, yeah, we'll tell the story about me getting flown up there to get yelled at that time, but that was
for totally different reasons.
Yes, and it had an interesting twist in the changing of teams of people from Nintendo to Sega.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the thing.
I took.
No, go ahead.
So I took the money from the trial, essentially used that to buy like my first shitty used car. We always took your car though. We always took the Nova.
Yeah, your
Or no,
car.
the Bronco.
Yeah,
The
I had
Bronco.
already crashed the Nova at that point, so
Yeah.
so I was driving that Bronco. And yeah, what that was, that the Cavalier that you had?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
that
terrible.
thing was. Remember when we drove to San Francisco and got rear-ended, and you were so freaked out that you just like drove off? Like we got hit, and you were like, "No, we have to keep going.
Yeah,
Like we're gonna get mugged." You know, it's just like
yeah, then remember
idiot.
2 years later in my Tracer when we got hit on the side in the Tenderloin, and I did the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm currently driving around with a busted taillight of my own doing that I just haven't been bothered to fix.
Yeah, no, it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
so
no, it's
so that's the NES era kind of closes with some of that stuff, because the SNES would hit in 91, the Genesis would hit in 89, so we were kind of off to the races on this 16-bit era, and Nintendo just handled things differently through that era, largely in part because of Sega's actions, which will, Tom Kalinske joined Sega of America in 1990 as CEO, and that's really starts to turn their story around. And we'll talk more and more about Sega in a separate episode here. But I guess the other thing that happened along the way here is that, we grew up and kind of got to a point where we were maybe a little tired of Nintendo's kind of kid-friendly attitude. It's not to say that the games weren't great, like when Mario World came out and Pilot Wings and that sort of stuff, like those are still amazing video games. But I think that, as I was coming into my own as an asshole teenager, the Nintendo attitude, the Nintendo style didn't hold as much sway, especially once Sega kind of got up and running and providing that alternative. It was weird.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the fact that arcades held on, the computer games were getting better.
Yeah.
I mean, the limitations of the NES just became more and more obvious. And I think that there's something about this industry where it's just people's lust for a new system.
Yeah.
Like constantly. And now it's silly to think about, but it was like 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit.
Like the numbers game aspect of it was always so dumb.
And color palettes. And I mean, it's just so stupid to think about in hindsight, the technological limitations. And so for one thing, I'm sure we'll find this, it's like, we're sure we'll revisit this, is like I read old reviews and it's like every new system that came along, every sports game, this is just like watching sports on TV. This is just like watching sports on TV.
Yeah.
Hollywood style special effects. And it's like we were saying this shit about the PlayStation 1.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can go look at like pre-release PlayStation 2 footage and press and what they were saying about it, and they were just like, it's like Toy Story, but real, but it moved, in real time, and like, no, it wasn't. It didn't look anything like that. But
video game journalism is better now, but video game journalism, I mean, try and think about this.
They would let any idiot kid, I mean, look,
Yes.
Like they let me do it, like they would let any fucking idiot kid do it for a while, because there weren't people out there that had like full on credentials and study that wanted to come do this. It was like people that were extremely into video games and, could write reasonably well, and
well, and the people that did, so I won't name and shame them here, but like there was a very prominent writer who since has gone on to have a very big career outside of game coverage. He would request videotapes of gameplay because he didn't actually play games.
Great.
But he would like write it up based on that. And then remember, like there were the weird lifers, like the people that had been in it, that to us, we thought they were like ancient, but turns out they were just in their 30s and 40s when we were kids. And they always had this weird air about them. And it was like, well, you're not really making a living doing this. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think my youth and just my ability to string a sentence together. And precocious to some, it worked for what it was as a gimmick.
Yeah, and I think honestly, it was a mix of that and then doing public access television and being comfortable around a camera ended up being a really big game changer for me later down the line when stuff started evolving and we started being on camera a lot more. Like I was already comfortable with that. Like I understood the concept of reading off a teleprompter like really quickly and could do it. And so it gave me a leg up. And when that phase of the web kind of came around, I felt like I was already ready, largely in part because of all of that shitty public access we did.
And we tried to do that at GameSpot early on. Like, remember we did? What was the short movie you and Ryan did with the gun?
Yeah, well, they wanted there was one of the stupid the idea was that every single review needed to have a video with it. And so what were we going to do for peripherals? And we just shot these really dumb concepts. And it was just like something you couldn't get away with today. It was like me and Ryan running around in the streets with PlayStation 1 light guns, aiming them at each other and like all this other stupid shit.
I remember Joe Hutsko yelling at me because I was like, why don't we take a controller and stress test and like run over it with the truck and do all this stuff?
Yeah.
And he was just like, what's wrong with like, I want to just find him now and send him a link to Will It Blend and be like,
right.
okay,
Yeah.
like, I was on to something.
This is where the money was, Joe. I am on LinkedIn with Joe Hutsko. Joe Hutsko's a good guy. He was the
I always liked him, but but he was like the adult that was put in charge of babysitting us.
Yeah.
At launch.
Yeah, but like pre-launch, and then he moved on, and then there were a handful of other people that came in to try to get us to show up on time.
Here's the thing, dude. I mean, like, as I've been revisiting my issues for all this, like, I watched way too much movies and TV as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, think about it. It's like drama club, school government, wrestling. Like, I had this like bad case of protagonist syndrome. I got a good IQ score in second grade, which I think is bullshit, but I got it. I got in the GATE program.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in a way, it kind of fucked me up for life because there's nothing. I mean, like, literally, they were taking us out of class to go work on computers, and we would come back and the kids were making those milk carton calculators with the flashcards.
Yeah.
And like we were learning to program like in Logo.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally.
My ego, terrible case of protagonist syndrome. And if there was something going on, it was literally like a sitcom that I was like breaking story. I'm like, okay, the theme this week, Glenn and his friend are going to do a public access show because public access is available. We're going to do that happen. I'm going to run for president. I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
It was very much like, what misadventures am I going to get into this week?
Yeah, totally. And I think, for my end, it was just like, I think it was an extension of the drama, like whatever it was that drove me to take that drama class and perform, like just ended up funneling into just like, no, like they want to tell me what I can and can't do. Clearly we need to get a television show. That's clearly the next step, and start writing sketch comedy. Except we're not writers, and also not that funny.
Well, you were. I still don't think I think I'm witty or clever at best.
I mean, I'm fast. Like that's the thing. It's like especially like, and then I was not nearly as fast. So like we just biting off way more than we could chew in terms of just like writing fucking comedy at age 16 is like, no, man. Like, it was a fucking.
So there you have it. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed the little bonus of let's call that a little over half of the first episode of Game Boys to Men. And if you want to hear more of that, of course, you can go to patreon.com/Jeff Gerstmann, and there are instructions there for getting on the right tier for getting access to the rest of the run. And that's been a lot of fun doing that show with Glenn. Obviously I've known Glenn for a long time, and we just the weird roller coaster that he and I have been on. Sometimes the same roller coasters, sometimes incredibly different roller coasters over all these years. It's been fun to kind of reconnect with him and talk about this stuff that we never really talked about. We never really spent much time thinking about back then. Just kind of like did it and kept moving, and it's been very interesting so far. So I hope you're enjoying that. If you're already on the Patreon, if not, hey, check it out. It's a ton of fun. And yeah, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Jeff Gerstmann Show. I'm going to push this button, even though I'm not wearing headphones. I can't even hear them. Oh no, I have my speakers up a little bit, so I can still hear it a little bit. But yeah, sorry, I'm like super rambling here. I'm not as together as I thought I was. This is crazy. Like I'm a little sweaty. This is the most I've spoken in over a week. And it's like tiring. There's a difference in the wind. There's a difference in the wind that I have a little bit. Whatever. I'm sure it'll all come back fine. Just need a few more days. Just rest up a little bit. And thanks everybody for being understanding. It's been a weird thing to go through for sure. Be back on the other side of this. Hopefully be back on Tuesday for the full-on show. And we'll keep moving and all that sort of stuff. So again, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you soon.